Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 1581. The Blood Curse Technique. Where is the place where the humans are slaughtered? Zen asked as he stared at him. Aiden was uncomfortable at Zen's gaze. Is this guy planning to charge in alone? He thought. The sacred race had a lot of troops stationed in the 7 Ultimate World even though it wasn't an important world. There weren't any Supreme Lords present, but there were several World Lords and 2 Grand World Lords. The human World Lord standing before him was strong enough, but wanting to rely on himself to contend against the sacred race in the 7 Ultimate World. This was too naive. But Aiden would still be happy to see this fellow throw his life away. All human beings are being escorted to the ultimate immortal city. But there are 9 World Lords and 2 Grand World Lords guarding the city. I'd advise you. Zen interrupted him. Nice try. Aiden's heart trembled. He couldn't wait for Zen to go to the ultimate immortal city to seek death, which was why he was urging Zen. I never intended to spare your life, Zen continued, a faint smile on his face. But I'll spare your life now, and let you watch as I head towards the ultimate immortal city. Zen reached out and patted Aiden on the forehead, sending a strange power shooting through Aiden's mind like a wriggly snake. This power shook Aiden's mind and he felt his vision turn black before he fainted. Zen looked around before locking onto a direction. In a flash, he stepped into the air and disappeared into the rain of blood, his body shifting over 100 miles away. Once reaching the first level of the grand teleportation of the space law, one was able to cover 100 miles with each step. Zen would not get lost in the evolutionary universe. He had the teleportation token and the roaring token. To him, the entire evolutionary universe was an open, unobstructed place. But right now, Zen was not in a hurry to return to the celestial position race. He felt that he needed to do something. Traveling through the Supreme World wasn't difficult after becoming a World Lord. It would take several decades for a warrior of the Soul Sea realm to cross a Supreme World on foot without the help of a spatial channel. But it would only take a few days for Zen to cross the Supreme World. Blood-red clouds churned in the sky as if there were millions of vengeful spirits howling within. Zen continued to travel through the blood rain. When droplets of blood landed on Zen's body, his lips pursed into a thin line to the point where one couldn't see them anymore. Just how many human beings had been slaughtered to cause this blood rain? 5 minutes later, Zen's gaze landed on a valley below. A countless number of humans passed through this long, narrow valley. There was also a small number of martial artists of the sacred race. The cultivation of these sacred martial artists wasn't too high. They were only at the internal elixir realm and the virtual tribulation realm. But these few sacred martial artists were able to escort hundreds of thousands of human mortals. Zen's gaze narrowed as he changed direction and shot towards the valley. The humans in the valley formed a long line and walked slowly along the road. The blood rain formed a blackish red-colored mud once it dried up. The stench it gave off was disgusting. The mud was wet and slippery, so one would have to be careful or risk falling. Most of these human beings were ordinary people. Although they were all born in the upper world, they had never practiced martial arts. Not everyone had the potential to become a martial artist. To ordinary people, a martial artist at the nature level was already a top-tier martial artist. Hurry up, stop dawdling. A warrior at the internal elixir realm was floating above their heads. He held a black whip in his hand as he shouted to the crowd. These mortals were the citizens of the Creek Kingdom in the 7 Ultimate World. To a martial artist, traveling 10,000 miles in a day wasn't much of a task. But a mortal being able to travel 20 miles in a single day was strong enough. They had traveled 40 miles, forced by these martial artists. Every one of them was exhausted and at the end of their physical strength. What was more, most of the old and the sick had already been eliminated along the way. A majority of those who survived were young and strong, with only a few being elders and children. Grandma, why are they so fierce? A lively-looking little girl in pigtails asked as she stared at the martial artists in the sky. She was in her prime, but had fallen onto such dangerous times. The old woman beside the little girl had a pained expression on her face. At her age, walking 40 miles was a miracle, but the martial artists were still dissatisfied. To them, they were being far too slow. But no one dared stop. A vivid image of the people who had died so miserably before was burned into their imagination. "Sweetheart, don't ask," the old granny said weakly. As she finished her sentence, she lost her balance and fell heavily to the ground. But she didn't have the strength to get up again. "Grandma, Grandma," the little girl screamed, but no matter how loudly and how many times she called, the old woman didn't open her eyes. The path within the valley was quite narrow. The old woman, having fallen down, was now blocking the line of people behind her. A warrior at the internal elixir realm in the sky noticed the commotion. He flew over, the long whip in his hand held aloft. "What's going on here?" They paled as they saw the martial artist approach. One of the humans said, "Sir, we've already traveled 40 miles today. We're too tired to walk. Can we rest for a bit? Take a break?" The martial artist sneered. "Cut the garbage. Taking you to ultimate immortal city in 3 days is my mission. If you delay my time, all of you will die." As the martial artist spoke, the whip in his hand lashed downwards like a snake. A martial artist of the internal elixir realm might not be worth mentioning in the evolutionary universe, but against these powerless mortals, they were existences that ruled over life and death. The whip lashed towards the old woman. The little girl in pigtails was still crying helplessly beside the old woman's body, and didn't notice the danger hovering above her head. Once the sacred race had occupied the 7 ultimate world, they began an unprecedented massacre that didn't spread to the ordinary humans from the very beginning. The first ones they eliminated were the people in the 3 sacred places within the 7 ultimate world. Among them was the Saint Lord of the 7 ultimate sacred place, who led the elites to resist with all their might. But he had died in the end. The sacred race had spent less than 3 days occupying these 3 sacred places, at a speed that was truly astonishing. Even after occupying the 7 ultimate world, the sacred race had never planned to act against the commoners from the start. There were often tens of thousands of mortal kingdoms of various sizes in a supreme world. The strongest powerhouses of these mortal kingdoms only had cultivations of the illuminating soul realm, and it was very rare for them to reach the virtual tribulation realm. So the sacred race merely ignored the mortals. The mortal kingdoms, on the other hand, had always been silent about what the sacred race had done. The mortals knew, through the voices from the roaring tokens, that a sacred race had been invading the universe these past few years. But they didn't pay much attention to what the sacred race actually was. After all, these battles didn't have anything to do with the mortals. They believed that even though the sacred race occupied the 7 ultimate world, they would not act against the mortal kingdoms because they were not a threat. But this time was different. The elites of the Humanity Alliance often resorted to roundabout tactics. Usually, after the sacred race took over a supreme world, the Humanity Alliance would then quietly seize it back. There were too many supreme worlds, so it was impossible for the sacred race to send out people to guard each of the supreme worlds. The sacred race was annoyed by the tactics of the Humanity Alliance. They discovered that no matter how hard they tried, they just couldn't take another step forward. In these 3 years, after eating up more than 3,000 supreme worlds, they didn't have the energy to attack the thoughtless minds. This was not an ideal result for the sacred race. But the leaders of the sacred race managed to come up with a solution. They could use the blood curse technique to seal the supreme worlds they occupied. The blood curse technique was a very sinister and dangerous curse. It could harm the humans once it was successfully set up. Their entire bodies would rot, and their life vitality would flow in reverse. They would finally die from the pain and torture. Chapter 1582, The Tragedy of the Week. The blood curse technique was also a way of employing the malicious aura. The reason for this was that the malicious aura was actually a sort of curse. In the evolutionary universe, there was no systematic approach for using the malicious aura. Supreme Lord Sword, who had taught Zen the god's intimidating strike, had devised a way of taking advantage of the malicious aura to suppress one's emotions, thereby helping to ace the emotion-closing godly way. In comparison, the sacred race's method of deploying the malicious aura was much more advanced. This was because they could transfer the curses in the malicious aura however they pleased. Every creature could spread curses before dying. The cursing power of an individual was insignificant, but combined with the power of millions of living beings, it was incredible and not something to be trifled with. The blood curse technique only affected other members belonging to the same race. For example, if the blood curse technique was enchanted using human blood, it could only be targeted at living humans, and creatures of any other races would not be affected. So once the sacred race carried out their plan successfully, the enchanted blood curse technique used by them would only harm the human race and have no effect on their own race, the ogres, the demon knight or even the wild beasts. Only human supreme lords did not fear the blood curse technique. But if the world lords were under the influence of the curses for too long, they would also be harmed. Every time the sacred race occupied a supreme world, they would enchant the blood curse technique, so that they would not have to fend off a counterattack by the human race. Only the supreme lords were able to break the blood curse technique. But in the current scenario, all supreme lords of the evolutionary universe were hiding in the territory of the celestial position race. Anyone who dared to come alone would undoubtedly fail and die. Since the human race had lost 3 of their supreme lords, any new casualties would only tip the scales in the sacred race's favor. This was the sacred race's tactic to consolidate their attacks in a step-by-step method. Swish! The whip of the sacred warrior slashed down sharply like a vicious serpent. If the old woman and the little girl were to get hit by the whip, they would certainly get smashed into a bloody pulp. The other mortals around them watched on with indifferent and weary expressions. Nobody had the guts to step up and help them. The sacred race was like a group of demons from hell for these powerless mortals. Anyone who dared to fight them would be squashed brutally like a puny ant. 4 hours earlier, over 100 humans had protested that they needed to have a rest. But the only response they had received from the sacred race was a lash of the whip. The wretched whip swept across the crowd like a sharp sword. As a result, over 100 humans had been hacked in half and died miserably in a pool of blood. They had now realized that begging the sacred race for mercy was meaningless. The only possible consequence, if any, was drawing their deaths closer. But at that moment, a figure clad in a yellow robe dashed toward the little girl suddenly and grabbed her arm before rolling swiftly to the side. Just as the girl was removed from danger, the whip lashed ruthlessly at the old woman. Instantly, her emaciated body was shredded to bits and then turned into a cloud of blood. "Your Majesty," the girl exclaimed in shock when she recognized the man who had saved her. After nodding at the little girl, the middle-aged man in the yellow robe looked up into the sky and said loudly, "Sir, please calm down. I will lead my people to move on. Please don't take it to heart." The 300,000 mortals were citizens of the Creek Kingdom. The yellow-robed man was the ruler of the kingdom, who was also the only illuminating soul realm warrior of the small kingdom. The Creek Kingdom had developed significantly in these years. 2 second-grade sects had been established in the kingdom, one of which was governed by the king himself. However, as the ruler of the small kingdom, he had no powers to fight against the warriors of the sacred race. He was well aware of the fact that the sacred race would send his people to the ultimate immortal city as blood sacrifices, but he didn't have the strength to tackle them. The only thing he could do was to follow their orders obediently and move toward the ultimate immortal city. Over 100,000 people out of his 500,000 subjects had died during the journey. Some of them had been killed by the sacred race, but most of them had dropped dead due to exhaustion. Don't take it to heart. Did you take our orders to your heart? What if due to your slacking our plan got delayed? The internal elixir realm warrior of the sacred race reprimanded the king coldly. The king of the Creek Kingdom was filled with resentment, and yet he knew they couldn't even protest. They were like weak lambs ready for slaughter in the eyes of the sacred race. "Please, I will supervise my people and urge them to move faster," he begged, gritting his teeth. Right, do your work well, you oaf," the sacred warrior snorted. For him, the king was as insignificant as the other humans, but they still needed him to control the large army of humans so that they could keep moving smoothly. Without the king's command, their speed might have been much slower, and many more people might have died. Truth be told, the sacred race didn't want to kill too many mortals if possible. After all, their intention of taking these humans to the ultimate immortal city was to use their blood. If most of the people died on the way, their efforts would be in vain. The king let out a deep sigh. He turned to an official aide and ordered, "Send word to everyone that I have commanded them to move faster." The official was over 70 years old. Although he was also a martial artist, his physical condition had declined because of his old age. It was a Herculean task for a teenager to trek over 40 miles in a day, let alone an old man like him. "But, Your Majesty, they can't take it much longer." There was grief and indignation in the official's voice. Countless people had already succumbed to exhaustion on the way. Would all of them have such atrocious deaths? "We have no other choice. We have to endure it," ordered the king in a solemn voice. "Endure it? But when will it end? We will all be sent to the ultimate immortal city and these savage warriors will drain our blood for their usage." A general of the Creek Kingdom couldn't help but yell angrily. He was a warrior at the consummation of nature level and had a violent temper. His patience had reached its limit and he could not hold back his anger any longer. You're absolutely right. Even if we follow their orders without resisting, we will still get killed in the end. We are going to die anyway. Why don't we just go all out and fight these rascals? I would rather die right here, right now than become their blood sacrifice. They were human beings, after all, not lambs for slaughtering. Lambs couldn't sense what was out there for them, so they would dumbly obey orders until the last moment came. Since these humans knew that there was no hope for survival, they no longer had any intentions of being mute spectators to their own deaths. If death was imminent, they would rather commit suicide than help the sacred race with their plan. Discontent quickly spread among the crowd. After a long period of suppressing, the low-level warriors and mortals finally revolted. The little girl buried her head in the king's chest and did not dare to look around. Her grandmother had died miserably just a few moments ago. Her innocent mind had been tainted by the malice of the cruel world. What are you doing? Do you all want to die right here? Hearing the commotion below, the sacred warrior floating in the sky brandished the whip in his hands and lashed down mercilessly. With a resounding crack, a barbaric aura emanated from the whip. Thwack! Several people were hit by the tortoise whip and were instantly ripped to pieces. Bleeding fragments of their bodies scattered around, and the air was filled with screams from the crowd. The nature-level warriors' eyes turned red with fury. They couldn't hold themselves back any longer. I'll fight him to the death. Let's kill him. Yes, let's die a worthy death. Nature creatures didn't have the ability to fly. They clambered up the towering walls on both sides of the valley and leapt into the sky to attack the sacred warriors. There was a hint of sarcasm on the sacred warrior's face as he snorted, "Do you think you are strong enough to take me on? You don't even have the ability to challenge me." It was a ridiculous notion that a piddling lamb wanted to take on great warriors. This was the only thought in the sacred warrior's mind. He waved his whip and it immediately turned to a vicious serpent, which slithered towards the nature-level warriors with the intention of swallowing them all. The king of the Creek Kingdom closed his eyes. He didn't have the heart to see his people getting killed in front of him. His face was contorted in distress. 3 months before, he had enjoyed the company of his many wives in the imperial palace. The whole kingdom had been living peacefully. But now, he had to witness his kingdom slip into the abyss of despair. He didn't have the strength to change their fates. This was the tragedy that befell on the weak. If he was powerful enough to kill the internal elixir realm warrior, he might still have hope for saving his people. Dear God, is weakness an unforgivable sin? He thought wistfully. However, he didn't hear any painful screams from his people. Instead, he heard the sacred warrior yelling in shock, "Who are you?" Surprised by this turn of events, the king opened his eyes and saw a human warrior appearing out of the blue and floating in the air. He pinched the whip between his fingers quite coolly and stopped it from wreaking any more havoc on the humans. Chapter 1583. A very great hero. The sacred warrior of the internal elixir realm continued to stare at Zen. The aura that emanated from Zen's body made the warrior realize that he was not to be taken lightly. The gap between their cultivation levels was enormous. Although he could not detect Zen's true strength, he was sure that Zen's cultivation level would be at least at the spirit supreme realm. It was possible that he might be a world lord. We have occupied the entire 7 ultimate world. Despite this, he came here alone. Is he courting death? The sacred warrior wondered. Who are you? What do you want? Oh, I see. You are here to surrender yourself to us. Maybe the sacred warrior's cultivation level wasn't very high, but he definitely had a vivid imagination. He quickly came up with the most probable reason suggesting Zen's presence. If Zen really came to surrender, then he might still have a chance at survival. The warrior wanted to think the situation was in his hand. There is no reason for you to know about my intentions, Zen replied coldly as he loosened his grip on the whip. The sacred warrior was surprised with Zen's reaction. He had thought he understood Zen's intentions. Maybe he is too embarrassed to admit it, thought the warrior. However, his optimism was crushed with Zen's next response. You are too weak to even spar with me, Zen said, closing his eyes. All of a sudden, he released the pressure from his soul, spreading it across all directions. The internal elixir realm warriors noticed the commotion down below. They examined Zen's movements from a safe distance. They started to panic once they understood what Zen said. They realized that situation was not in their favor and immediately turned around to escape. But just as they escaped, they felt a sudden sag as if their heads had been struck with a heavy hammer. Their heads and souls instantly burst like bubbles. The souls of internal elixir realm warriors had never been trained before. They were as fragile as newborn babies and had no way to resist Zen's attack from his soul. In a blink of an eye, the sacred warriors escorting the human captives suddenly turned into headless corpses and plummeted downwards. Silence filled the entire valley. All of the mortals raised their heads to look at Zen with disbelief. They couldn't imagine his power. For them, Zen was like a savior sent by the heavens to save the people of the Creek Kingdom. Zen glanced at these mortals briefly and was about to leave when he heard a voice from below, "Sir, please wait a moment." A figure flew into the sky towards him. This person was none other than the king of the Creek Kingdom. He was at the illuminating soul realm, and hence possessed the ability to fly. There were only a few people with such cultivation levels in his entire kingdom. "Sir, I am the ruler of the Creek Kingdom. Since you saved us from these warriors, can you help us a little more and take my people out of the 7 ultimate world?" The king pleaded with Zen. He knew that his cultivation level was much lower than Zen's. Zen already did a huge favor by saving their lives and he did not have the liberty to ask for more favors. But he was also aware that without Zen's help, they would not be able to survive in the 7 ultimate world. The sacred race would discover his people very easily. What was more, once the blood curse technique was used, no humans in this supreme world would have a chance to live. Even if they hid in caves that were 10,000 feet underground, they would still be affected by the blood curse technique. Their only way was to get out of this supreme world. The little girl stuck her head out from the king's arms and stared innocently at Zen with her deep black eyes. Her curiosity towards Zen overcame her fears as she carefully measured him with her eyes. Zen of course figured out what was going on in the king's mind. But he only shook his head and refused. "There are too many of you. I can't take all of you away. It is too much even for me to handle." The king looked dejected. He knew he went beyond his limit to ask for a favor. Zen's help was already a blessing for them, and they should be content with it. Suddenly, Zen's eyes cleared as he looked at the wall on the side of the valley. Gazing at the valley, he fell silent for a moment. He approached the steep mountainside and lightly tapped with his finger. Instantly, a 10-feet-high hole appeared on the wall of the mountain. Zen's finger was like a sharp blade as it cut through the cave and continued to expand downwards. After about half a minute, he had dug out a cave that was hundreds of thousands feet wide and millions of feet deep. When Zen got out of the cave, he asked the king, "Do you have enough food with you?" The king immediately understood Zen's intentions and a troubled expression appeared on his face. "We have enough food, but it is pointless to hide in this cave." The sacred race had forced their entire kingdom to migrate. Before leaving, the king had already ordered everyone to bring all the food they had with them. With the current ration, they could easily live for half a month. But what was the use of hiding in this cave? Once the blood curse technique was activated, the result would be the same no matter where they hid. Zen realized the king's worries. "I will not let the blood curse technique affect you all. You only need to hide in this cave for a few days," he said. Hearing this, the king was slightly astonished. His cultivation level might be very low compared to Zen's, but that didn't necessarily mean he was a short-sighted man. After all, he was still a warrior of the upper world. The king realized that Zen wanted to stop them from using the blood curse technique. "You will have to trust me," Zen said in a calm voice. When the king saw Zen's determination, he felt a sense of trust. Perhaps this young man could really do it, he thought to himself. "Thank you for your great kindness. If you help us overcome this crisis, The king originally wanted to promise Zen great rewards. But all of a sudden, he was doubtful if it would be enough to express his gratitude. He was an illuminating soul realm warrior. Only warriors understood the gap in strength between the strong and the weak. The mortals, on the other hand, couldn't tell the difference between an internal elixir realm warrior and a world lord. In their eyes, all warriors were the same. The king had vaguely guessed Zen's true strength. Since he dared to come to the 7 ultimate world alone, he had to be a world lord or maybe even a supreme lord. They had no way to repay such a powerful being. We don't have the capabilities to repay your kindness. We can only bow down to you and thank you for what you have done for us." As he finished speaking, the king knelt down in front of Zen and bowed to him with respect. Seeing their king bowing down before Zen, the mortals below also followed suit. Hundreds of thousands of humans in a long line prostrated themselves on the ground and bowed to Zen. Zen merely shook his head and said, "Just take your time and get into the cave. I will then shield the entrance." The king nodded and quickly gave the orders to his subjects. After everyone had entered the cave, Zen used the divine textures to set up a magic array around the cave entrance. After he activated the magic array, the entrance disappeared out of sight. This magic array couldn't deceive the world lords. Even a spirit transformation realm warrior could easily find the flaws in this magic array and discover the hundreds of thousands of humans inside there. However, the task of escorting these mortals was given to the internal elixir realm warriors. With Zen's current strength, even a virtual tribulation realm or life and death realm warrior wouldn't be able to see through his magic array, let alone an internal elixir realm warrior. Thus, he believed that this cave was enough to keep these people safe. After he was done with his arrangements, Zen left and continued on his way to the ultimate immortal city. The king stood at the entrance of the cave as he held the little girl in his arms and stared after Zen's disappearing figure. "Who is this man, your majesty?" the little girl asked in her sweet voice. The king smiled and said, He is our great hero." "A great hero? Is he a very, very great one?" the girl asked, tilting her head. "Yes, a very, very great one," the king repeated and laughed. The girl nodded her head and stared in the direction that Zen had disappeared for a long while without blinking. Zen's image was already engraved in her little mind. Chapter 1584, Blood Pool. This valley was only 100 miles away from the ultimate immortal city. It would only take Zen a single step to teleport there. But out of caution, he decided to not directly teleport to his destination. After he returned from the Divine Refinement Forbidden Land, Zen's strength had improved dramatically. However, this did not mean that he was skilled enough to deal with the reckless behavior of the sacred race. In fact, the closer he got to the sacred race, the more cautious he became. He even slowed down and flew at a lower altitude. Along the way, Zen discovered several groups of mortals. Their numbers ranging from over 100,000 to 500,000 per group, all escorted by sacred martial artists. Clearly, they were being sent to the ultimate immortal city. Zen didn't bother to intervene. They were already too close to the ultimate immortal city and any conflict would be easily detected by the warriors inside the city. Moreover, the root of the problem was in the ultimate immortal city. As long as he could break in the ultimate immortal city and stop them from using the blood curse technique, Zen believed the sacred race would stop the reckless slaughter. After all, these mortals were weak. Just as humans didn't care to kill ants, surely the sacred race wouldn't be so bored as to kill these insignificant mortals. Soon, a golden city gleamed in Zen's field of vision, the ultimate immortal city, the largest city in the 7 ultimate world. Looking down, he saw a huge round plate the color of blood, looming over the city. Countless runes were rolling in it and 4 red pillars extended upwards from the city and connected to the bottom of the plate. The plate was continuously absorbing dark red blood through the pillars and sprinkled it into the sky, forming blood-red clouds that spread throughout the whole 7 ultimate world. The closer Zen got to the city, the stronger the stench of blood became. It was as if what was ahead of him was a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. The once hustling and bustling city had become purgatory. Zen quietly floated to the side as he observed the place. After he formed a plan in his head, the killing intent in his eyes died and his cinnabar field sealed up. He changed his appearance to that of a weak mortal and quietly landed in the center of the road leading to the ultimate immortal city. Shortly after, a group of mortals walking along the road approached, several sacred warriors escorting them. The closer they got to the ultimate immortal city, the more impatient the internal elixir realm warriors became. "Hurry up, it's taken 9 days to travel 300 miles. It's too slow." A sacred martial artist roared. He raised the whip in his hand and viciously lashed it into the air, making a cracking sound that was too much for some mortals. The people were already exhausted from their journey. No matter how hard they tried, they still couldn't keep up with the speed the sacred race had set. Nevertheless, they squeezed the last bit of their strength and dragged their feet. A moment later, the sacred martial artist leading the group found Zen lying on the ground. "How did we miss this one?" he muttered gruffly and lashed his whip at Zen. Zen's eyes flashed with anger. He wasn't afraid of the whip. He knew the warrior wouldn't be able to hurt him even he lay there motionlessly, but if his whip really landed on him, his cover would surely be blown. Pa! The whip didn't hit Zen in the end. It landed beside him and left a large hole in the ground. "You," the warrior regarded him coldly. "Get back to the group." The sacred race's goal was to acquire human blood. If the humans all followed their orders and got to the ultimate immortal city without a hitch, then there was no need to kill recklessly. And now that they were close, Zen was practically like lost sheep and wasn't worth killing. Plus, Zen looked very weak. His entire body was covered in mud and he had concealed his cultivation level and soul. He even acted flustered as he shied into the crowd. Zen frowned at the expressionless faces of the mortals around him. They didn't spare Zen a single glance as he joined their line and instead had continued to walk like zombies. They only thought about moving forward. Where they were heading and what fate awaited them did not matter anymore. They were too tired. They were only about 20 miles away from the ultimate immortal city, but it still took the exhausted mortals half a day to reach its gate. On top of the grand city wall stood a garrison of sacred warriors. Most of them were at the Soul Sea realm while a few were at the Spirit Supreme realm. Did you hear? Someone seemed to have killed the Frisia squad. The 7 warriors in this squad were all Spirit Transformation realm elites, and someone managed to kill them all without anyone noticing. This person's strength must be that of a world lord. World lord, don't you know the Frisia squad has killed world lords before? If not a world lord, then is this person a supreme lord? Would a supreme lord really dare to come to the 7 ultimate world? I know, that's what's most baffling. There aren't many supreme lords in the evolutionary universe, so they obviously won't do anything rash. If a supreme lord were to die here, it'll be a great loss for humankind. It's unlikely that they'll take such a risk for a borderline supreme world. So strange. Even when the warriors were far away, Zen could hear them well. As soon as he passed through the city gate with the others, he felt the perception from the martial artists sweep through their heads. Although the blood curse technique could help the sacred race take over a supreme world instantly, it was quite troublesome to use. Moreover, the array laid out using this technique was extremely fragile. If they weren't careful enough and the array was destroyed, all their efforts would be for naught. They had learned this the hard way when they had used the technique in another supreme world. So in order to prevent such incident from happening again, they began taking more care in screening the mortals. Creatures sent to the blood pool would have to be screened 3 times. The first screening would be at the city gate and the second would be inside the city. The third screening would be by the blood pool. Thankfully, the martial artists didn't find anything abnormal during the first screening. Zen had successfully entered the ultimate immortal city and continued to follow the mortals to advance on the city's wide road. After the sacred race occupied the city, the martial artists living in it had been slaughtered. The previously bustling streets were now empty, and with the thick smell of blood, the city was now quite literally a ghost town. Even the martial artists of the sacred race felt uncomfortable staying there. In order to use the blood curse technique, the sacred race had built 4 huge pools inside the city. Each pool was the size of a small lake, large enough to hold hundreds of thousands of people. On the main road leading to the blood pool in the south of the city, 6 spirit transformation realm warriors were stationed. These warriors had cold expressions and powerful auras. Compared to the sacred martial artists at the city gate, they were much more vigilant. Streams of strong perception continued to sweep over everyone's heads, and one particular stream stopped on top of Zen. Zen upped his acting and walked forward with wobbly legs, trying to look like he was about to fall down any moment. The spirit transformation realm martial artist glanced at Zen. However, seeing him covered in mud, the martial artist looked away boredly. Martial artists at higher levels of cultivation had an advantage in concealing themselves from marital artists at lower cultivation levels. The sacred warrior, while unable to find any flaw, could subconsciously feel that Zen was slightly different. However, since he couldn't tell exactly what was wrong, he decided to let it go. Zen felt himself getting closer and closer as he passed through each screening process. When they finally reached the blood pool, a commotion suddenly broke out. Although the mortals were bone-tired from the long journey, their heads immediately cleared when they saw the unpleasant scene in front of them. Broken limbs and other body parts floated in the pool, and the metallic stench of blood was making the horrific scene 100 times worse. At the side of the blood pool, mortals were being lined up and were forced to jump into the blood pool. The moment a mortal jumped into the pool, an invisible force appeared in the air, twisting the person into pretzels. Blood splashed out from their twisted bodies. It was a scene too horrible to behold. Chapter 1585. Noticed Zen. Beside the blood pool was a passageway several dozen miles wide. The entire passageway was densely packed with several million mortals. Because the line was too long, the people at the back couldn't see what was happening and could only follow behind others. When the mortals in the front saw the pool of blood, there was already no way back. The mortals were screaming, struggling, but there was some sort of force heaving them forward. Even if they fell to the ground, their bodies would automatically make their way towards the blood pool. Disguised in the crowd, Zen carefully observed what had happened. Above the blood pool, there was a massive array of divine textures. The number of divine textures could add up to over 100,000 at his approximation. This is so intriguing, so complex, Zen said in astonishment. The sacred race's blood curse technique could be specially tailored to a certain race, and it was also extremely powerful. It notably had its own unique yet identifiable characteristics. However, the more complex the array, the more intricate the details were. Once it was destroyed, it would be almost impossible to repair. The sacred race had spent a great deal of effort in putting this up. Using the blood curse technique to occupy a supreme world meant that the sacred race appealed to their last, most desperate option. Presently, the demon knight race and the ogre race were in conflict, while the sacred race and the three major powers of the human race were in on and off battles. If the sacred race didn't consolidate these supreme worlds they had occupied, it would be a challenge for them to progress. Therefore, the sacred race's strategy was to consolidate the supreme worlds one by one, and then continue to advance towards the thoughtless minds. Zen followed the group. As he stood 300 feet away from the blood pool, he felt a force tugging on his body. It was urging him towards the blood pool, just like everyone else. The surrounding mortals had already realized the danger they were in. Although they knew it was impossible for them to escape the force, they still struggled as much as they could, attempting to pull themselves as far away from the pool as possible. However, no matter how much they fought it, the force was relentless. Mortals were too weak, too helpless to break free from the force. All they could do was accept their fate as they inevitably slid into the blood pool, watching as their companions were twisted into pretzels with blood showering all over the place. In order to avoid suspicion among the sacred martial artists, Zen was constantly wriggling his body to resist the invisible force. As he struggled, Zen slowly glided down the path towards the blood pool. Shortly after, Zen found himself at the edge of the blood pool. His gaze was fixated on the blood curse array. Apparently, this blood curse array did not only serve as an array. In addition to being able to extract blood, it could also guide malicious aura and transform the curse. After mortals died in indignation, they would leave behind a strong curse at the last moment of their lives. The array would then blend the power of curse with their blood, and spread it out. Because the array obtained human blood, the curse only affected the human race and had no effect on other races. After scanning his surroundings once again, Zen discovered that there were several powerful defensive divine textures on the array. He reckoned that there were attempts to destroy the array, so the sacred race had no other choice but to put up defensive divine textures. The sacred race made sure that there was a world lord to guard each of the 4 blood pools of the ultimate immortal city. Beside the blood pool in the south of the city, there was a woman from the sacred race standing there, immaculate and graceful. The women of sacred race usually had plump figures, and even when they rolled their eyes, they were exceedingly fascinating. Across their faces, there were 3 birthmarks on their cheeks shaped like wolf teeth. All sacred women had this the moment they were born. They believed that the longer the wolf teeth were across their faces, the purer their bloodline was. This also meant higher social statuses which many enjoyed. Some women of the sacred race with shorter wolf teeth birthmarks would use a rouge to shape the wolf teeth birthmark, extending it all the way to the 2 sides of their noses. This sacred woman had been standing guard here all day. She seemed to be absent-minded and stared blankly across the area. Maybe having stayed here for too long, she was sick of the thick stench of blood. She glanced indifferently at the mortals who awaited their doom. As she saw their bodies being twisted into all sorts of ways, she felt an indescribable flinch in her heart. There were tens of millions of mortals being slaughtered in every blood pool. Countless of them from the small countries of the 7 ultimate world were sent here to be ripped to pieces. Here, most of the malicious auras that emitted by them would be absorbed by the blood curse array, but the martial artists guarding the place would more or less be affected by part of the malicious auras. Perhaps the woman guarding was affected by these auras, too. Sacred mind clearing formula. The eyes of the woman from the sacred race suddenly flashed out a sharp, white light as she used the sacred mind clearing formula to clear her mind. As she employed the formula, she felt all the frustration in her heart dissipate. She held a jet black dragon teeth token in her hand as she said, "Maha, when will you come back? I'm so tired of just being here." The dragon teeth token was the tool that the sacred race used to communicate in long distance. When holy beings made the rules of the universes they had created, the rules varied among others. In the evolutionary universe, the roaring tokens could spread the sound to every corner of a universe, but it was to shout to everyone through the roaring token. It meant that every living being in the universe could hear the voice at the same time. The sacred race's communication tokens could also transmit the voice message to anywhere, but it could only be transmitted directly to another communication token. This dragon teeth token was made by the horns of rare twin dragon teeth beasts, which were unique in the Murphy universe. No matter how far apart they were able to communicate with each other through telepathy with their horns. Sacred warriors killed the twin dragon teeth beasts and used their dragon horns to make the dragon teeth tokens. The horns worked the same, and could be used to communicate from one horn to another. However, such communication tokens were extremely rare in the Murphy universe. A few moments after, a voice came out from the communication token. Haha, I'm killing people in the matchless world. Do you miss me, Connie? Yes, I definitely do, Connie replied in a gentle voice. Which part of me did you miss? Maha asked, smirking. You're such a tease. Her face flushed. As she spoke, her gaze inadvertently swept across and saw Zen standing at the other side of the blood pool. Huh, Connie was momentarily stunned. What's up, Connie? Maha asked, concerned with Connie's response. Connie didn't take her eyes off Zen. The longer she looked, the more familiar he seemed. I think I have seen someone I knew. On the Breaking Cloud Mountain, during the confrontation between the sacred race and the celestial position, the sacred race recorded the faces of all 10 godly geniuses, including Zen's appearance. Just now, when she casually swept her gaze over the crowd, Zen caught Connie's attention. She remained confused, and very, very intrigued. Who is it? Asked Maha. It seems to be one of the 10 godly geniuses you mentioned last time. Connie's expression then grew excited. The wolf teeth marks on her face turned bright red, and a faint black light constantly flashed within her pupils. Zen hadn't changed his appearance at all. Although his face was covered in mud, she could see what he looked like with a single glance. There were so many mortals in this supreme world, and there were always a few familiar faces. Zen blended in, using a simple concealing technique. Connie's colorless eye could see through almost all concealment techniques. This was why she easily noticed Zen. How could this be? The godly geniuses have returned, Maha exclaimed. Ever since the confrontation at the Breaking Cloud Mountain, the 10 godly geniuses disappeared from the evolutionary universe. No matter how hard the sacred race searched, they couldn't trace any of them. Murphy, their master and the creator of the Murphy universe, had given them a mission to eliminate all godly geniuses. But they disappeared, and did a good job at keeping hidden. The sacred race had secretly investigated for months, but there were no news regarding the godly geniuses. In the end, they came to the conclusion that the celestial position had already sent all godly geniuses into the divine refinement forbidden land. The sacred race thought of other methods to find them. They tried to send some of the world lords of the Murphy universe into the divine refinement forbidden land to hunt down these godly geniuses. But when they had put in all their efforts to build the transmission array to the divine refinement forbidden land, the sacred race found out that they had actually been rejected. This meant that they had no way to enter the divine refinement forbidden land, and no way to find the godly geniuses. Chapter 1586. Breaking the Blood Curse Array. It was common practice to send the best talents in the universes into the divine refinement forbidden land for cultivation. Maha of the sacred race had been to the divine refinement forbidden land before, since it was an open place. But at the end of it all, the divine refinement forbidden land was Holy J's place. He would, by no means, let the warriors of the Murphy universe enter the divine refinement forbidden land to hunt the godly geniuses of the evolutionary universe. Holy J and Murphy were both members of the Hall of Holy Beings who looked to be in harmony to the public. But they had quite a few conflicts in private. The sacred race couldn't hunt the godly geniuses in the divine refinement forbidden land. So Murphy resorted to different means. He asked the true gods of the sacred race to place the grand space spell around the evolutionary universe. When the godly geniuses returned to the evolutionary universe from the divine refinement forbidden land, the grand space spell would be activated and the godly geniuses would be transferred to random places. That was why Zen was transferred to the 7 ultimate world instead of the transmission array of the celestial position race. Are you sure the godly geniuses are back? Maha asked, his tone dripping seriousness. The godly geniuses would randomly be sent to the supreme worlds in the evolutionary universe by the grand space spell. This was a good chance for the sacred race to eliminate them. I'm not sure, but I will try to kill him, Connie said. The wolf teeth birthmarks on her face became redder and redder in an indication of her increasing excitement. She quietly brewed the life vitality in her body as she stared at Zen from the other side of the blood pool. Don't act rashly, I'll come over to you as soon as possible, Maha said anxiously. Maha, the young master of the sacred race, was very arrogant, but he was also a smart man. The godly geniuses were Holy Mike's last hope. He had spent a lot of resources on them. As a result, every one of the godly geniuses was a mighty warrior. They had been cultivated in the divine refinement forbidden land for 3 years. Now that they had returned, their strength must have been multiplied greatly. Maha, who had cultivated in the divine refinement forbidden land before, knew all about this. He was afraid that Connie would be no match for the godly genius that she encountered. Connie, however, didn't take Maha's words seriously. Zen was sliding towards the blood pool, the strength in his body constantly brewing. His goal was not only this blood pool. If everything went well, he would completely destroy all 4 blood pools in the ultimate immortal city as soon as possible. Zen didn't realize that a woman of the sacred race was after him. 1,000 feet, 500 feet, 100 feet. Zen was getting closer and closer to the blood pool. The smell of blood seemed to solidify in the air, but he seemed to not care about it. As Zen moved slowly towards the edge of the blood pool, the invisible force lifted him up. He stepped on the edge of the blood pool with 1 foot, and his body suddenly shook and threw away the invisible force. The invisible force was released by a certain divine texture in the blood curse array. When Zen had broken off from the invisible force, his power had countered it, a power that had exceeded the limit that the divine texture could bear. The divine texture immediately exploded. At the same time, ordinary people on the road felt relaxed, and the invisible force that had driven them to death had vanished. Zen had been brewing for such a long time. Once he started to make his moves, he would not hesitate anymore. He was like a lurking predator who suddenly found the chance and rushed towards the blood curse array above the blood pool. Tisk, tisk, you are a swift guy, Connie said. She had been observing Zen all this while. She kicked at the air like a dancing butterfly, black beads appearing around her. She moved out, blocking Zen's way. What are you planning to do, handsome? Connie asked Zen, a seductive smile on her lips. Zen was shocked that the woman had found him. But his surprise only lasted for a few seconds before he said coldly, "Idiot off." Hardly had his voice faded than he threw a punch at her. Come on, don't be so rude, Connie complained, pouting, as she used her palm to block his strike. She was not afraid of him. There were godly geniuses in the evolutionary universe, and there were godly geniuses in the Murphy universe too. Connie was one of the godly geniuses of the Murphy universe. She was already a world lord, and her next goal was to condense a godly tile and become a true god. The warriors of the sacred race regarded themselves head and shoulders above others, which was why Connie didn't think highly of Zen. But the moment her palm connected with Zen's, her expression shifted drastically. She hadn't expected Zen's palm strike to contain such terrible power that she couldn't resist it. The power that the strike contained could kill a normal world lord. Crack, 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 crack. The huge force poured into Connie's arm, the black beads around her body beginning to burst one by one. Before she could react, 4 beads had exploded. The huge force from Zen's strike had suppressed Connie and sent her smashing into the blood pool below, causing a huge blood splash. Connie, who was now in the blood pool, was scared out of her wits. The 7 black beads around her were treasures given to her by a supreme lord of the sacred race. They were called the life-sacrificing beads. Each bead could bear a fatal injury for her. Every time a black bead exploded, she died once. These life-sacrificing beads had been with her for many years, and they had never exploded before. After all, she was respected in the sacred race, and there had been little chance for her to face a life and death crisis. Never in Connie's wildest dreams had she thought that a man would smash 4 of her life-sacrificing beads with just 1 strike. Just one of Zen's palm strikes was able to kill her 4 times. One could only imagine how terrified Connie was at the moment. It was not until then that she remembered that Maha had warned her about this before. Connie was frightened. She crushed a light purple divine texture in her hand and a sharp siren sounded in the ultimate immortal city. All the warriors of the sacred race in the city were on high alert when they heard the siren, the highest level of alert. Zen's eyes didn't stop at the woman. His only goal was the blood curse array. He suddenly swung in the air and continued to rush towards the array. As Zen progressed, he heard a buzzing sound, and a light yellow transparent light curtain appeared before him, blocking his way. An enchanted barrier. Zen had been looking at the blood curse array for a long time. It was obvious that there would be an enchanted barrier in the blood curse array. Following his own momentum, Zen threw a punch at the barrier. Boom! To Zen's surprise, the enchanted barrier shook twice, but didn't break. Connie slowly floated up from the blood pool. She sneered as she saw Zen's move. Even if Zen had infinite power, it was impossible to break the enchanted barrier with brute force. The enchanted barrier was created to deal with warriors with brute force. 4 identical enchanted barriers were arranged above the 4 blood pools in the ultimate immortal city. The 4 enchanted barriers were interconnected with each other and they would collectively bear the attacks that any one of them received. If one wanted to destroy one of them, they would destroy all 4 of them simultaneously. A world lord just couldn't do so. Connie was optimistic in nature and didn't fear Zen killing her. She took out the communication token and said with a smile, "Maha, when can you come here? This guy has already started attacking the blood curse array, but he plans to break the enchanted barrier with brute force. It's just." Connie broke off, her eyes widening in shock. Zen had raised his hand and begun to twist space with his fist as the center. It was a piece of cake for a world lord to distort space with the space law. But she did not feel any space law in Zen, which meant that he hadn't used the space law to distort space. He had just used his pure strength. This force was so powerful that it created the gravitational force that distorted space. The blood in the blood pool, under the gravitational force, also moved and twisted. To everyone watching, the center of the blood pool sank down, as if there was an invisible ball pressing into the blood pool. Zen's fist was at the center of this ball. This guy's strength is unbelievable. Connie's eyes widened even further and a bad premonition overcame her. Chapter 1587, Breaking Enchanted Barrier. Just as Connie's siren reverberated throughout the air, numerous beams of light from all over the ultimate immortal city shot up into the sky. The black lights and white lights auras were the most powerful among the light beams. The thick waves of smoke billowed like the wind as they surged and soared into the sky with a grand aura. Suddenly, a loud voice shouted, "Who dares to break into the ultimate immortal city?" A burly figure dressed in black armors appeared within the blurry black light. He had a fiendish look to his face, like a tiger ready to pounce at any given rate. "Perhaps it's a little mouse that's lost," answered back a voice within the white light, where a skinny young man in flirtatious clothes stood. He had 3 wolf teeth birthmarks on his face, and he was even more beautiful than a woman. It was known that only women in all of the sacred race were born with wolf teeth birthmarks, so this young man had imprinted them onto himself. The black figure and the white figure were the sacred race's 2 grand world lords who guarded the ultimate immortal city. In addition, they were quite well known in the Murphy universe. The black one was called Ralain, and the white was Leacock. "Ha, I'd like to see how skilled this little mouse is," Ralain sneered, then shot towards the south side of the city. A long, black smoke like a brush stroke left an inky black trail in the sky in his wake. Leacock faintly smiled and went on to disappear as well. Although the ultimate immortal city was a vast piece of territory, it only seemed like a courtyard to the world lords, such that they could travel the entire city in just a few steps. Meanwhile, the other world lords exchanged looks and shot towards the south side of the city as well. Even though Connie's warning screamed the deadliest news and hinted that a strong enemy was here, these world lords didn't look so bothered. It was because looking at the battle from all perspectives, it could be said that a human supreme lord would have to risk dying if they wanted to break the blood curse array. Such a hazardous action was definitely not worth risking for a place that wasn't as important, like the 7 ultimate world. On the other hand, there was nothing to be afraid of a world lord who sneaked into the ultimate immortal city, since the city had 2 grand world lords. One human world lord alone wanted to destroy the blood curse array. That was childish. In a blink of an eye, the world lords appeared above the blood pool at the south of the city. Before all of those had happened, Zen had already accumulated a portion of his power in front of his fist. The power extracted from the 9 stars was already condensed to the limit, and had lesser impact on the surrounding environment. Of course, they didn't see the shocking scene that Connie had witnessed. At that moment, Zen threw a single punch towards the enchanted barrier and ignored the sudden appearance of the world lords. "As I expected, a human world lord. Interesting, you're quite the courageous one," Ralain said with a faint smile as he sized Zen up. "Indeed, using brute force to break the 4 images time barrier. This guy is really imaginative," Leacock agreed with a mocking smile. The enchanted barrier that covered the 4 blood pools was known as the 4 images time barrier. The supreme lords of the sacred race were required to personally set the enchanted barrier's mysteries, so that it could protect the 4 blood pools from damage. Because the 4 enchanted barriers were connected as one, and shared the attacks imposed on them together, it was nearly impossible to break the 4 images time barrier with brute force. Therefore, all of the sacred race's world lords present were fully confident in this enchanted barrier's power. It was also why the 2 grand world lords didn't want to stop Zen. They simply wanted to see how this ignorant human world lord who didn't know his limits would be able to break the 4 images time barrier. Since the 2 grand world lords themselves hadn't acted yet, the other sacred world lords naturally wouldn't act either. "Hurry up and stop him," Connie warned. She honestly hoped that with her warning, Leacock and Ralain would stop Zen. She had just witnessed how devastating Zen's power was. To what level did his power achieve that it had distorted the surrounding space by force? Ralain and the others looked at Connie in the blood pool with curiosity. Although Connie had just become a world lord and her cultivation wasn't that stable yet, she still had an exalted status. She was also one of the godly geniuses of the Murphy universe and was not less powerful than an ordinary world lord, if not better. Why was she so anxious then? However, Leacock had seen that something was wrong and guessed that the brat in front of them must be really special. But it was too late to stop him now. Zen's punch had already come into contact with the edge of the 4 images time barrier. The power extracted from the 9 stars was immensely strong. Once it gushed out, it was like an unstoppable torrent of energy had washed over the 4 images time barrier. Crack! The warriors of the Murphy universe all thought that the 4 images time barrier couldn't be broken with brute force. Such a notion had long been the belief of the people of the sacred race because they had never seen anyone, not even a supreme lord, break it with brute force. It could be said that a supreme lord who carried the heavenly destiny was the incarnation of the rules. If even a supreme lord couldn't break the enchanted barrier, then such was the rule. However, the 4 images time barrier was not completely immune to power, and it wasn't completely impossible to break it with brute force. If one used a power that could surpass the limits of the 4 images time barrier, then it would be broken. The sharp, ear-splitting sound lasted for 3 seconds. When Leacock, Raleigh, and the others heard it, they immediately felt that something was wrong. When they had been previously full of confidence, now they started to worry. Could this human boy really shatter the 4 images time barrier with a single punch? They all felt anxious on the inside, but their subconscious still held on to the thought that such a thing was unlikely. Yet, not everything went according to one's wishes. The sharp sound became increasingly shrill and unbearable. Then, slight explosions followed. The small explosions accumulated repeatedly until they ultimately erupted into one intense explosion. Boom! In the speed of light, everyone saw Zen's arm pierce through the 4 images time barrier. Something just as bad happened at the same time. The enchanted barriers above the other 3 blood pools in the ultimate immortal city were also instantly destroyed. The 4 enchanted barriers were connected and withstood damage together. While it indeed greatly increased the barrier's strength, it also posed an incredible disadvantage. Once one of the barriers was destroyed, the others would be destroyed as well. It was the price to pay since the barrier was a single entity. Raleigh was in a daze as he stared at Zen, who was in the middle of the blood pool. Meanwhile, Leacock and the others stood dumbfounded as well. Connie was the only one who wore a frown. Based on Zen's earlier display of strength, this scene would obviously happen. He wants to destroy the array. Stop him, now. The other world lords were in a state of panic. It wasn't easy to set up the blood curse array. If it was broken, the leaders of the sacred race would clearly punish them. Aside from Connie, the other world lords had to take responsibility for the destruction. Not even one of them could escape. However, they were still quite a distance away from the blood pool. How could they easily stop Zen? The 2 grand world lords reacted quickly and moved in a flash, but after Zen had broken the 4 images time barrier, he had already rushed upwards and had turned into a cone which drilled into the insides of the blood curse array. At the same time, an invisible ring of light spread out under Zen's feet. Zen, who was now in the array and had left behind the ring of light, broke into a strange smile and took a step forward. The light of the space law scattered under his feet as he used the grand teleportation and disappeared from where he stood. The world lords who charged forward were stunned again. What did the human world lord want? Even after Zen had expended so much effort and finally broke the 4 images time barrier, he had actually managed to escape without destroying the blood curse array. The crowd was confused. The reason they guarded this place in the first place was to protect the array, so that the blood curse technique could be cast smoothly. They couldn't afford to lose those divine textures in the ultimate immortal city. They would all be killed if the divine textures were destroyed. While the world lords were indeed puzzled, they also felt slightly relieved. It was as if they were faced with a madman. But after a few seconds, they finally understood. This fellow was no lunatic at all. Rhombic fragments began to form in the sky, which constantly gathered together. The sky was then filled with numerous bolts of thunder. The heavenly tribulation was about to arrive. Chapter 1588, Killing World Lords. There weren't cultivation methods like the Thunderbolt annihilation in the Murphy universe. Murphy, the creator of the Murphy universe, was extremely strict in controlling the heavenly tribulations in the universe, which was why the warriors of the sacred race all looked at each other in confusion when they saw the heavenly tribulation. They had no idea it was triggered by Zen's cultivation method. They even wondered whether Zen had made a breakthrough. Holy garbage! A warrior cursed! We must stop the heavenly tribulation. Without the protection of the enchanted barrier, the blood curse array is too weak. Another shouted. The Thunderbolt Annihilation was a special cultivation method which, when used, allowed the user to communicate with the heavens to induce the heavenly tribulation. And once the heavenly tribulation was started, the whole process could not be stopped or reversed. Zen himself was unable to stop it, so what chance did the other world lords have? And more than that, their time was running out. Crack! Lightning flashed across the whole blood curse array, followed by consecutive crashes of thunder. The 100,000 divine textures in the blood curse array were very precise and fragile. They were closely related to each other, and the tiniest damage could lead to the collapse of the whole array. Without the protection of the enchanted barrier, how could the divine textures withstand the raging storm? In an instant, half of the divine textures caught fire and the blood curse array above the blood pool was destroyed. The blood curse array had originally been extracting blood from the blood pool, transforming it into a blood column and sending it to the bloody disk in the sky. However, as soon as the column that stretched to sky lost its support, it collapsed to the side and fell into the city, bathing the place with blood. Looking at the destroyed blood curse array sent shivers down the spines of the present world lords of the sacred race. It was unbelievable. The blood curse array was destroyed just like that. Dang it. Ralane's face drastically changed. Since the 4 images time barrier was destroyed, the other 3 blood pools were also exposed to the air. Add to that, Zen had also disappeared. They initially thought that he escaped, but from the looks of it, he must have gone to destroy the other blood pools. Leacock's expression was a mirror of Ralane's. Without a word, he used the grand teleportation and rushed toward the blood pool in the northern part of the city. As Zen also used the grand teleportation, the world lords didn't know where he went, and the 2 grand world lords could only take their chances. The 2 of them chose a blood pool each to investigate, while the rest of the world lords scrammed to the blood pool in the west. Connie emerged from the blood pool, and with a slight shake of her body, she rid herself of the blood that covered her. She looked at the destroyed blood curse array and snorted. Ralane and Leacock did not listen to her, so they deserved to suffer. If all the blood curse arrays were destroyed, the end of these 2 grand world lords would be quite miserable. But this had nothing to do with her. Connie had just become a world lord, and she had come to the 7 ultimate world to gain experience. Even if the senior leaders of the sacred race were to punish them, this had nothing to do with her. That human lad, Connie murmured as she sat beside the blood pool. Did that human really have such power? Was he more powerful than Maha? The thought reminded Connie that Maha would come, so she raised her message token and called out to him. Maha, are you on the way? Maha was not far away. There were only 3 supreme worlds between the matchless world and the 7 ultimate world. However, if Maha wanted to go to the 7 ultimate world, he couldn't do it in a short time. Just give me some more time, Connie, Maha replied anxiously. I'm almost there. If you don't get here soon, that human brat will get away. Connie teased. Get away? Not gonna happen. Maha laughed. He did not come alone. Murphy's orders were clear. The sacred race attached great importance to the 10 godly geniuses in the evolutionary universe. Besides Maha, there were also 2 supreme lords. They all raced to the 7 ultimate world at a breakneck speed. It would be a miracle if Zen managed to slip from their hands. The only reason Maha was anxious was because he wanted to be the one to finish Zen. When the 2 grand world lords flew to the blood pools in the north and east and saw that the surrounding areas were empty, they knew they made a wrong choice. With a grit of their teeth, they immediately transformed into 2 rays of light and sped toward the blood pool in the west of the city. After one became a world lord, their comprehension of the space law reached the 9th layer, and they would be able to use the grand teleportation. However, one could not use the grand teleportation without any limitation. Ralane, for instance, had to rest for 150 seconds after using it. The 2 grand world lords, however, were too anxious to rest, so they chose to fly to the west of the city. The other 6 world lords had chosen to move to the blood pool in the west. One of them, the fastest, got there before anyone else. When he popped from the space, his eyes just circled the area when suddenly, he felt a strange killing intent behind him. His expression morphed into one of horror. Before he could turn around, a sharp pain stabbed his back. My crimson snow cloak. As his eyesight dulled, a thought flashed in his mind. He had once made a great contribution, and as a reward, he was given the crimson snow cloak by a supreme lord. Defensive treasures were extremely rare, and the cloak, a supreme divine weapon, had saved his life countless times. It was a pity that his opponent was Zen. This kind of treasure was powerful, but it couldn't protect him completely. With one punch, Zen tore through the crimson snow cloak, and the world lord's internal organs were smashed into pieces. The world lord, like a fallen leaf, swayed and fell into the blood pool. The blood curse array was so close, but Zen was not in a hurry to destroy it. In fact, he decided to stay and wait. When a world lord moved across space, strong spatial fluctuations were produced, and these fluctuations would be the ones to tell Zen the direction of the world lord. That way, he could easily catch his opponent. When two world lords using the grand teleportation to chase one another, the person escaping would be at an advantage since he'd be able to feel the spatial fluctuations which he could use to identify where his opponent would appear. Just now, Zen killed the world lord of the sacred race by ambushing him. Tens of feet from him, the space law began to fluctuate, signaling the arrival of the second world lord. Zen moved toward the ripples and waited to attack. Swoosh! The world lord nearly collided with Zen as he drilled out of the space crack. Now, the two faced each other, only inches apart. He didn't think Zen would dare to ambush him, but quite obviously, he thought wrong. Another thing he didn't expect was the smile on Zen's face as he pulled back his fist, ready to punch. Boom! Just like that, the world lord fell to the ground in a lifeless heap. With the rays of light of space law flashing one after another, Zen moved quickly in the air. He'd kill all the world lords that dared to appear. Below, warriors of the sacred race as well as mortals with low cultivation levels were looking intently at the sky. Some of them were nature creatures, and some were illuminating soul realm warriors. In their eyes, the warriors of the sacred race were invincible. But why couldn't they fight off the young human? As Zen killed world lord after world lord, he saw a ray of black light and a ray of white light flashing in the sky, signaling the arrival of the two grand world lords. Zen grinned as he slowly escaped into the blood curse array. With a circle of light spreading out under his feet, Zen activated the Thunderbolt Annihilation and teleported to the next blood pool. Quick, use the lightning introducing stone. Veins stood out on Leacock's face as he roared at R'lyeh. This seemed to turn on a switch in R'lyeh's head as he suddenly remembered that he had a stone that could absorb thunder. In his panic, he had forgotten all about it. I'll go after the human brat. You activate the stone. With that, Leacock teleported to another blood pool in the city. R'lyeh was on the verge of exploding. Right now, he wanted nothing more than to kill Zen. He wasn't interested in activating the stupid stone. Why are you alone? He snapped at the lone world lord beside him. Where are the others? The world lord pointed to the blood pool where several bodies were falling in. R'lyeh's eyes widened. He didn't expect that in such little time, Zen had managed to kill several world lords of the sacred race. His eyes were red because of anger. He was burning with a frenzy of rage. He threw the lightning-introducing stone at the world lord and spat, "You activate the stone. I'll go help Leacock." He teleported away, leaving the world lord alone with the lightning-introducing stone. The world lord glanced at the stone in his hand and looked at the brewing heavenly tribulation in the sky. "I don't know how to use the lightning-introducing stone," he murmured. Chapter 1589, The Flawless Divine Body. Both R'lyeh and Leacock flew into an unprecedented rage. The two of them were well known in the Murphy universe given their status as Grand World Lords. They were only second to Supreme Lords. The difference between a Supreme Lord and a Grand World Lord was a single heavenly destiny. Both of them had been promoted to generals by the sacred race and in turn, led their armies into the evolutionary universe. They left nothing but destruction in their path and feared no one in the entire evolutionary universe, save for human Supreme Lords of course. Just a year ago, the Grand World Lord of the Sunset World used a roaring token to challenge R'lyeh to a battle to the death. The two exchanged thousands of blows and the fight ended in R'lyeh's favor. That Grand World Lord who unfortunately perished was the one who gave Zen the reward when the latter participated in passing the torch. The difference between a World Lord's strength and a Grand World Lord's power was great. Zen had just reached the cultivation level of a World Lord. However, he was able to rely on his cultivation to break apart a blood curse array and kill 4 warriors of the sacred race. He didn't even try to escape and even managed to destroy another blood curse array. How could R'lyeh and Leacock bear this? They did not care about the blood curse array at that point. All they wanted was to capture Zen and make him pay the price for playing around with them like this. The World Lord who held the lightning-introducing stone had no way of knowing what the 2 Grand World Lords were thinking about. All he did was watch the lightning bolts descend upon and shatter the blood curse array before him. The 2 Grand World Lords had already used the grand teleportation to chase after Zen. Unfortunately, when they arrived the blood pool north of the city, they didn't see Zen. The two of them exchanged glares and quickly pinned the blame on each other for the failure of their chase. Zen, on the other hand, had moved to the blood pool east of the city. R'lyeh quickly noticed and gritted his teeth in anger. He immediately rushed towards the east side. "Don't!" Leacock stopped him. His goal is to destroy the blood curse arrays above these 4 blood pools. He'll come to us sooner or later. We just need to wait and catch him off guard to kill him easily. Leacock was the more level-headed of the two. Zen had effectively launched sneak attacks and caught the 4 world lords off guard. Leacock then decided to have Zen taste his own medicine and use his own strategy against him. That brat is a mere world lord. Do we really need to be sneaky to kill him? Ralain complained. I don't think he's an ordinary world lord, do you? Leacock shot back. Ralain stiffened at Leacock's question. Zen had just broken the 4 images time barrier, a famous sacred race's enchanted barrier that could only be destroyed by a special method. Not even Leacock and Ralain were able to break it when they tried using brute force. It wasn't just them. No one else in the Murphy universe could break such a thing using brute force, yet Zen did it so effortlessly. This seemingly ordinary world lord had shattered a supposedly unbreakable barrier with just brute force. Since he dared to attack the ultimate immortal city, he surely has someone powerful backing him up. We have to be careful in dealing with him. Leacock then raised his head and watched as lightning struck and shattered the 3rd blood curse array in the distance. He should be coming, he murmured. Ralain couldn't help but agree with Leacock's words. He had initially regarded Zen as a mere rat that wanted to cause trouble. He had been toyed by this rat, so he naturally felt vexed. However, Leacock's reasoning enlightened him. He had to calm down and understand just how terrifying their opponent was. The two reached an understanding. They quickly spread out their perception, covering the blood pool, and waited for Zen to make his move. A few seconds later, the two of them felt a wave of energy fluctuation from the left front. Suddenly, a bright light flickered. He's here. Leacock couldn't help but sneer at the thought of finally eliminating Zen. With a light sweep of his finger, black thorns appeared from thin air and circled around him. These thorns then formed a huge cage that completely covered the places where they felt the fluctuation of space law. Ralain's hands had now transformed into fiery, giant claws, ready to slash his opponent. However, the fluctuation lasted only for a moment and then disappeared. He didn't come. This kid is too smart. Once again, the two of them had gotten played by Zen. At that moment, a voice spoke from behind them. Are you waiting for me? Zen smiled faintly as he looked at the 2 Grand World Lords, who were clearly shocked at his sudden presence. The 2 Grand World Lords turned around at the same time, their faces revealing surprise. Ralain gave him a hideous smile. I thought you had escaped. Zen smirked. Why would I run away? You are indeed brave, Leacock said. However, mere courage is not enough. To not know when to retreat is courting death. If I were to face a mighty warrior, to not know when to retreat would indeed be courting death. However, am I not faced against 2 nameless people whose strength is not even worth mentioning? The two of them froze at Zen's words. There was something that didn't sit right with the human world lord before them. He was definitely stronger than what they had anticipated. Only an arrogant idiot would dare say those words to his opponents, or a fellow who truly possessed extraordinary strength. From the looks of it, this young man was the latter. So did he really think he had the capacity to defeat 2 Grand World Lords? Kill him, Leacock said. Ralain had been itching to do just that. He rushed towards Zen like a black rock and used his fiery red claws to swipe at him. Ghost Claw Strike. Red scales, containing boundless power, appeared on his hands. The hands contained boundless power. Leacock, behind him, was drawing non-stop in the air. Small green circles of light spread out from his fingertips one after the other, enveloping both Zen and Ralain. Finger burst. This was a theurgy that could only be used with the truth godly way. Leacock's godly way was the truth godly way, the same as Nathan's. However, he wasn't a godly genius. Each universe had a different symbol for a godly genius. In the evolutionary universe, a warrior became a godly genius if he activated the 36-petal lotus flower. In the Murphy universe, a warrior should be able to grow leaves on the spinulose wood fern, a black, withered tree. If one had an understanding of the godly way, a leaf would grow from the tree. It was only after 3,000 leaves growing on the tree would one be considered a godly genius. Leacock's spinulose wood fern only had 300 leaves, and it had not grown another one for the past 1,000 years. It was hopeless for him to ever become a godly genius. Before the invasion, he had been summoned by the Supreme Lords. That event really motivated him in proving himself. He was someone who wanted to accomplish great things. Right now, he hoped the sacred race would bestow a heavenly destiny upon him so he could become a Supreme Lord. Some Supreme Lords of the sacred race might possibly perish in the war, which meant the potential appearance of new crowns of destiny. Leacock knew he was qualified to inherit one heavenly destiny if that ever happened. As the green circles spread out, countless thin lines and dots appeared in the space. He was immediately able to find 3 flaws on Ralane's body, 2 lines and a dot to be exact. When he shifted his gaze to Zen though, his face immediately froze. The thin lines represented one's flaws while the dots represented one's dead points. Leacock's understanding of the truth godly way might not be as good as Nathan's, but he knew how to use it better. So it was with great shock and horror when he realized that he couldn't find any flaws on Zen. Does he have the flawless divine body? He murmured in disbelief. Chapter 1590. Meeting Maha again. It was a well-known fact that a true god was immortal because of their flawless divine body. One who carried a godly tile could have it purify their body and hone it to perfection. As a result, their life energy would never leak, even in the slightest. Such a body was called the flawless divine body. It was something that only a true god could possess. That was why never in Leacock's wildest dreams did he expect to see a world lord with the flawless divine body. It was simply unbelievable and even more shocking than the fact that Zen had broken the 4 images time barrier. Of course, he didn't know that Zen's body was now a perfect weapon. But in reality, Zen didn't actually have the flawless divine body. It was just Leacock was unable to find any flaws in Zen's body with his current comprehension of the truth godly way. After all, Zen was Holy Drew's masterpiece. While Leacock was stunned in disbelief, Ralane didn't think too much about it. He continued to hold Zen as his hands released all of his strength. "I'm gonna tear you apart," he roared. He wanted to tear Zen's body apart so much that an immense ghost-like power erupted from his red hands. Yet despite Ralane's recklessness, he was also wary of Zen's incomparable power. It was why once he had captured Zen, he acted quick and didn't give Zen time to respond. He knew that Zen was undoubtedly powerful, but that didn't mean that Zen had an unbreakable body. But then, Ralane realized he was wrong. When Ralane used his Ghost Claw strike, he could break even a divine weapon with his bare hands. Half a year ago, he had been faced with 3 human world lords from the Humanity Alliance, and one of them had a first-rank divine weapon, the crane-singing cauldron. So with the help of his strength that was beyond imagination, he had used brute force to tear the crane-singing cauldron apart. When he tried to do the same to Zen, he found he was unable to do so. Zen's body was so solid. "Your strength is remarkable, but it's far from enough to tear me apart," Zen commented as his face dripped with sarcasm. Meanwhile, the power of the 8 path platforms kept circulating and the 9 divine stars in his inner world began to turn slowly. Then, he slightly raised his arms and effortlessly broke free from Ralane's ghost claws. Apparently, he didn't give much thought about dealing with Ralane. "Kill him, Leacock," Ralane shouted. He also released his own strength, which had been maxed out to the extreme, so much that his veins popped out. He knew that he wasn't as powerful as Zen, so he could only pin his hopes on Leacock now. He knew that Leacock practiced the truth godly way, and his finger burst's power was incredible. As long as Leacock focused on Zen's flaws and used his finger burst, Zen would be dead no matter how talented he was. Both Ralane and Leacock were 2 grand world lords, but they had to work together to deal with a mere human world lord. It made them feel rather ashamed. But now was not the time for Ralane to think about such things, as all he wanted now was to kill Zen. Leacock's fingertip glowed a cyan light dot as his finger swung constantly. Once he saw a flaw in Zen, he would attack without hesitation. After quite a long while, he still hadn't made a move. This human brat didn't have a flaw at all. "What can I do?" Leacock sulked internally. "What are you waiting for?" Ralane roared impatiently. He wondered why it took so long, and he couldn't stand Zen any longer. As for Leacock, he was left with no other choice but to make his move. Swoosh! The cyan light dot from his fingertip flew toward Zen at a lightning speed and left behind a thin line in the air. Cling! The light dot hit Zen's body with a slight noise, and then it bounced away. The light dot was like a flimsy wooden arrow that had hit an iron wall. It didn't even leave a mark behind. Leacock's finger burst was supposed to be used against an opponent's flaw. He didn't find any flaw in Zen, so its power wasn't enough to cause any substantial damage. To be fair, he had only used the finger burst at Ralane's behest. "Are you done?" Zen asked in a mocking tone. He spoke to Ralane with completely open arms, and when he was done speaking, the corner of his lips raised into a slight smirk. Panic began to flood Ralane's mind. Just then, Zen swiftly turned his hands over and gripped Ralane's ghost claws tightly. "Now it's my turn," he declared. If one wanted to have a glimpse of how powerful Zen truly was, they only needed to see how his voice never faltered even when he unleashed a massive amount of strength. Ralane felt that his arms were trapped and crushed by an irresistible force. If he could not break free, he would be torn to pieces. He was more than panicking now. At that moment, his brain was already near to short-circuiting. He suddenly reminded himself that he became a grand world lord through countless violent battles. It could be said that he had more experience in fighting than Zen. It was under that critical moment that he had found the solution to his problem by instinct. His whole body suddenly flipped, and he rotated in the direction in which Zen turned his hands. Therefore, Zen's strength was greatly neutralized. At the same time, he maxed out his body strength to the extreme. He summoned all the determination he had, and soon enough, he broke free from Zen's hands. Crack, crack, the crisp sounds of broken bones accompanied Ralane's escape. Ralane had extremely solid bones, but even he had to twist the bones in his arms to break free from Zen's grip. The moment Ralane broke free, he retreated as fast as he could. He had to run. Zen sneered and swiftly ran after him. He wanted to clasp Ralane's arms again, but Ralane didn't dare engage him in a fight at the moment. Zen tried to catch him, but Ralane fled at his fastest speed. After Ralane had run about 30 feet, the white light beneath his feet flashed and his body became a blur. He jumped into the void and disappeared. He is so fast in running away, Zen complained with a look of surprise. Ralane had completed a series of actions in an instant, and had successfully escaped from him. Such was a world lord's fighting instinct. A world lord often used the grand teleportation in battles against another world lord if one strike had failed to work. So unless a world lord used a sneak attack, it was difficult to kill another world lord. Ralane had been a grand world lord for more than 100,000 years. The fact that he could escape from Zen's hands was because of his rich combat experience. Zen's gaze then drifted next to Leacock, whose face suddenly changed. Leacock quickly retreated and distanced himself from Zen, his eyes filled with constant vigilance. The grand world lords of the sacred race are not that strong, Zen murmured. After he briefly glanced at the Grand World Lord once more, he looked away and decided not to chase after him. Instead, he flew toward the blood pool and decided to destroy the blood curse array. Zen didn't know that his quick glance had hurt Leacock's self-esteem. Leacock was a Grand World Lord and he had comprehended the Truth Godly Way. Moreover, it was due to the uniqueness of the Truth Godly Way that he was able to kill a Supreme Lord if he had enough time and space. He had never been looked down upon by a World Lord like that. In the sacred race, even Supreme Lords would show some respect to Leacock. He couldn't understand why he had become a nobody in the eyes of a mere human World Lord. Although he was fuming mad, he could do nothing about it. The Truth Godly Way gave its user the power to find their opponent's flaws, and the user could defeat their opponent by attacking those flaws. But Zen didn't have a flaw. Thus, what could Leacock do with Zen? On the other hand, Zen slowly entered the blood curse array in the middle of the blood pool, kicked and punched it around, and quickly destroyed the divine textures within it. So far, he had completely destroyed all of the 4 blood curse arrays. After the bloody disk in the sky had lost the 4 arrays' support, it slowly began to incline on one side. A crack formed in the center of the huge disk, then runes began to dissipate one after another. Crack, 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 the whole disk disintegrated rapidly when it fell. It broke down into a shower of blood and painted the whole ultimate immortal city red. The disk contained the blood of countless people, which did not get absorbed into the clouds. Now, all the red liquid had been spilled. The blood washed down like a flood, and flowed into the streets of the ultimate immortal city like mad. The mortals in the ultimate immortal city all stayed in the streets around the 4 blood pools. The grounds where they stood were relatively high, so they did not get submerged in the flood. The bloody clouds in the sky still drifted about slowly, but they would gradually dissipate in a short time. When Zen saw the scene, he was not happy. The sacred race had killed countless mortals in the 7 ultimate world. One ordinary mortal might not affect the situation in the evolutionary universe. However, there could be few geniuses in such a huge pool of them. These geniuses were the foundation of the universe. With so many people dead, it was impossible to restore the prosperity of the city. Just then, a huge crack suddenly appeared in the sky of ultimate immortal city. Then, the head of a strange beast appeared from the fissure. It turned out to be the head of a world-devouring beast. On top of its head stood a young man with purple hair. He was none other than Maha, the #1 godly genius of the sacred race. Chapter 1591, The Great Dominance Technique. A slight breeze blew gently through Maha's hair as he looked down from above, and took in the view of the whole ultimate immortal city. His vision quickly narrowed as he focused on the blood pool at the east of the city. He continued to scan the area, and then his gaze finally landed on Zen. At that same moment, Zen looked up and met Maha's gaze with an equally firm stare. It was known that Maha had a transcendent status in the Murphy universe. He was extremely arrogant as the top godly genius of the Murphy universe. He even looked down on the supreme lords in the Murphy universe. He watched Zen with mocking eyes, as if the human martial artist was a mere ant. Aside from his arrogance, he was also ruthless and tyrannical, determined to remove every obstacle in his way. It could be said that he was born to be a formidable man. He emitted a threatening aura, much like a hungry beast which had lurked too long in the dark, more than ready to swallow Zen in one gulp. And so, this aura was released on Zen. However, the aura tended to radiate in nature. It meant that unless it was a soul attack, it was impossible to aim it accurately at a certain person. There were about 800,000 mortals who were gathered at the edge of the long and wide passageway beside the blood pool. The irresistible gravitational force was gone since Zen had already broken the blood curse array. However, it was still difficult to quickly evacuate hundreds of thousands of people, even if they all wanted to escape like mad. With so many people huddled together, deaths were inevitable in the event of a heavy stampede. Despite this, they all threw their doubts to the wind and fled for lives. It didn't matter anymore if they crushed the corpses of their companions, escape was their first priority. In turn, the martial artists of the sacred race didn't stop them. Meanwhile, a small amount of the aura Maha had emitted affected the crowd that was moving backwards from the commotion. Soon enough, their weak souls felt like they had been thrown in the middle of winter when they felt his overpowering aura. Their bodies trembled as their teeth chattered uncontrollably, before they finally fainted to the ground. Compared to Maha's oppressive aura, Zen was much more low-key. His stability was like an unmovable mountain. He was like a steady rock, even under Maha's strong provocation. His deep pupils were as tranquil as two ancient wells without the slightest ripple. Yet in those two ancient wells resided a faint, invincible spirit. What was more, there was also an even stronger and more domineering aura. The invincible spirit was naturally formed from Zen's soul and temperament, while the domineering aura was because of the Emperor's soul imprint within his soul. But while Zen knew that he and Maha would eventually fight, now was not the time. Whoosh! Just then, there was a sharp sound from the ultimate immortal city. A thin streak of light shot out and spiraled swiftly towards the world-devouring beast. Maha! Connie screamed and threw herself into Maha's arms. There were many other lower-level sacred martial artists around the blood pool. However, they didn't get a chance to be involved when the world lords fought, but hid themselves instead. And since most of them were men, they threw Maha envious looks when they saw Connie jump into his arms. Although Connie was considered slightly plump for human standards, she was the most beautiful lady in the eyes of the sacred race. She was of noble birth and boasted of many talents and profound cultivation. In other words, she was a goddess in the hearts of many sacred martial artists. It was widely acknowledged that outstanding people deserved even more outstanding people. Connie was Maha's girl. Thus, the others could only look at them in envy. Then again, the sacred martial artists also thought that only a young man of outstanding talent, like Maha, could match Connie. Maha threw his right hand around Connie and with a light leap, he rapidly dropped down towards the blood pond. After he reached a certain height, he abruptly stopped. He was at an altitude of 10 feet higher than Zen's. That way, he could look down on Zen and bask in the feeling of superiority among all of them. You're Zen Luo, the #1 godly genius out of the top 10 in the evolutionary universe. He was able to accurately tell Zen's name, thanks to his good memory. 3 years ago when I saw you godly geniuses, you were only at the Spirit Supreme realm. Now, you are already world lords. Did Holy J from the Divine Refinement Forbidden Land want to cripple you by forcibly improving your cultivation levels? Zen still looked up at Maha and said, you will know the answer if we have a fight. Maha shook his head and replied, if we can control the #1 godly genius of the evolutionary universe, then it will be beneficial to our situation. A living godly genius is much more useful than a dead one. At that moment, he stretched out a finger and gently pointed it downwards at Zen. Kneel down and submit sincerely to me. If you're willing to be my follower, I will spare your life. I can even take you into the divine land before this evolutionary universe is destroyed and bestow upon you an unimaginable amount of good fortune. When Zen heard Maha's words, he simply laughed. Then, he suddenly stopped and his sharp gaze seemed to slice through the thin air. Why should I submit to you? Zen asked. He had learned from his training in the mind-refining tower that he had to remain calm whenever he was provoked. No one could shake his faith. Ha ha ha, Maha laughed. What do you think the 7 ultimate world is? Not even human supreme lords dare to come in person. Since you've come, you won't be able to leave. So, it's good for you if you submit to me. It's the only choice you have left. Zen just laughed louder when he heard this, and then said, so you think I won't be able to leave? Of course. As soon as Maha's voice died down, 2 more space cracks suddenly appeared in the sky. A small amount of dust fell down as 2 figures inside the space cracks squeezed their way outside. Supreme Lords of the Sacred Race. On the other hand, Zen's eyes couldn't help but narrow at the sight. The skies above the ultimate immortal city emitted an oppressive force when the 2 Supreme Lords of the Sacred Race appeared, and all the pressure was directed towards Zen. There were a total of 156 Supreme Lords in the Murphy universe, 28 more than the evolutionary universe. One of the newcomers in front of Zen was Supreme Lord Noel, and the other was Supreme Lord Barry. Both of them were considered as mid-rank Supreme Lords of the Murphy universe, but their strength was not to be underestimated. After Supreme Lord Noel appeared, he gently waved his hand and a cone-shaped light shone on Zen. He cupped his hands towards Maha and said, "Godly genius, I've already planted a mark on his body. He won't be able to escape even if he has wings." The world lords who had mastered the grand teleportation technique could teleport up to hundreds of miles away. However, that distance wasn't enough for them to cross a supreme world in an instant. Furthermore, it was extremely difficult for a world lord to kill a fellow world lord, but for a supreme lord, it was a piece of cake. "Do you think you can find a way to leave?" Maha jeered. He laughed even louder, and at that moment, his voice suddenly changed. His much deeper bass had a trace of demonic nature in it as he declared, "The only thing you can do now is submit to me. Submit to me, submit to me, submit to me." His voice continued to echo ceaselessly, as if trying to drill into Zen's soul. Plop, 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 one by one, all of the martial artists of the sacred race below immediately fell to their knees. There were some mortals that still remained conscious, but they too knelt on the ground. They didn't fear Maha's pressure, but they couldn't resist the controlling force of Maha's voice. Great Dominance Technique. Numerous phantoms surrounded Maha when he shouted the command. The phantoms exuded an irrepressible aura as well. They ruthlessly pressed down on the living beings and instilled fear among them. Maha held absolute authority in the Murphy universe. Even Supreme Lords had to listen to his orders, protect him, and were willing to stay with him. The Great Dominance Technique belonged in the top 30 skills in the 3000 godly ways. When cultivated to its maximum, it could enable one to do anything as they pleased, control other living beings' thoughts, and make them submit to their will without even doing anything. While Maha had yet to become a true god, he came as close to condensing a godly tile. Thus, the Great Dominance Technique had a powerful effect when he used it. Even Ralain and Leacock felt their hearts tremble incessantly with fear. Although they didn't kneel to the ground, they still nodded their heads. They couldn't help both the fear and admiration for their superior. On the other hand, Zen still had a faint smile on his face. He was like a stone, completely unresponsive to Maha's Great Dominance Technique. Chapter 1592, A Heavy Blow. In the Divine Land, the Great Dominance Technique was a godly way that focused on the cultivation of one's soul. It strengthened one's soul and improved the intimidation from their aura. However, there was a prerequisite for the cultivation of the Great Dominance Technique: one's soul should reach the realm of Gold Fighting Soul. At the same time, one should also master the Emperor Soul Imprint. Holy J didn't guide Zen in the mastery of Godly Way. Zen needed to comprehend the Godly Way and condense the Godly Tile by himself. Only by doing so could the Godly Way be the most suitable for him. Both Holy J and Holy Drew thought that Zen's emotion-closing Godly Way was not the best choice. However, what was most crucial was that Zen should make the decision himself, and they should not interfere. Additionally, Zen had obtained the Emperor's Soul Imprint. He already had the precondition to cultivate the Great Dominance Technique. All that was left was for him to take a step forward. Maha had also obtained his Emperor's Soul Imprint in the Divine Refinement Forbidden Land. Maha seemed to have a good comprehension of the Great Dominance Technique. The aura he released was mighty and hard to resist. Even the Grand World Lords found it hard to confront Maha. The aura from him was powerful enough that it could also affect the state of minds of Supreme Lords. Although every Supreme Lord had the Gold Fighting Soul, they didn't possess the Emperor's Soul Imprint. As a result, they found it hard to resist Maha's dominant aura. Zen, on the other hand, had the Emperor's Soul Imprint. Thus, the Great Dominance Technique barely affected him. Even after he heard Maha roar, he was rather calm. He also delivered a sly smile on his face. The intimidation from Maha's aura continued to grow even worse. Golden light shone in his eyes as his soul power spread to the extreme. However, doubt could be seen in his golden eyes. How could Zen be unmoved by his great dominance technique? A disturbed expression formed on Maha's face. Connie lay in Maha's arms and looked at Zen below. A curious look painted her delicate face. She had seen Maha perform the great dominance technique before. When the sacred race first attacked the evolutionary universe, Maha had fought against 6 world lords of the Humanity Alliance alone. After he applied the great dominance technique, those world lords' minds were all affected, and they had no will to resist. They had been easily killed by Maha. If Maha wanted them to surrender, he could do it quickly. However, it would be meaningless since normal world lords were of no use to Maha. Back then, Maha had dealt with the 6 world lords with ease. However, with the current situation, Connie could feel Maha was very serious. He must have viewed Zen as a worthy enemy. Yet, why was Zen not affected at all? Was his soul made of stone? How could he be unmoved by Maha's dominant aura? Connie pouted her lips. Worry could be seen from her eyes. With the ineffectiveness of Maha's great dominance technique, she thought Zen made Maha lose face. Maha roared several times and demanded Zen to surrender. However, Zen ignored the threats. When his patience grew thin, Maha frowned and took out a roaring token. The roaring token in the evolutionary universe could amplify one's voice and expand it to the whole universe. That voice could directly enter people's minds. Because the voice directly went into people's mind with the law of causality, no one could resist it. Moreover, it had an added effect on Maha's great dominance technique. The combination would help him dominate the concentration of his opponents. Ever since Maha obtained his first roaring token, he became aware of its value. However, he hadn't used it to amplify his great dominance technique before. Buzz. When he activated the roaring token, Maha's powerful voice spread out again and reached every corner of the universe. Zen, surrender now. All the creatures in the evolutionary universe were able to hear Maha's declaration. Immediately, they became hopeful when they heard Zen's name. Zen, is he back? Where is he? Is it true? Have the godly geniuses truly returned? It turned out that many creatures in the evolutionary universe awaited the return of the godly geniuses. Their cries were full of hope as they heard the name of Zen. Most creatures already grew quite pessimistic and believed that the human race couldn't block the invasion of the sacred race. They feared the whole universe would eventually be destroyed by the sacred race. However, a small glimmer of expectation still lingered in their hearts. They still had the celestial position race, the 3 major forces of the human race and many supreme lords. Hope could still be felt through their army. The godly geniuses were still seen as the trump card of the universe. Zen and the others were the ones who would lead the world of chaos. In these 3 years, the sacred race had expanded in the universe at an incredible speed. Their invasion was unstoppable. The Humanity Alliance had lost one supreme world after another. They had retreated to the territory of the thoughtless minds. Other than the elite warriors of the Humanity Alliance, their forces had been already depleted by the sacred race. No one dared to be optimistic in such a dire situation. Despair had started to affect everyone. They could only expect miracles. Maha's voice, which contained the law of causality, irresistibly penetrated Zen's mind. If Zen fought against Maha's great dominance technique by shielding his voice, this move of Maha would have some effect. However, Zen only relied on his own soul strength to resist the suppression of Maha. Since Maha used the roaring token, Zen decided to use his own roaring token as well. With a flick of his fingers, 2 tokens jumped into Zen's hands. He gathered his focus towards the tokens. One was the roaring token. The other was the token of mountain which could allow him to get into the fairy palace. His pupils also twinkled, even brighter than Maha's under the golden glow. Confidence and pride could be seen in Zen's smile. Maha's aura was that of a tyrant. Violence and harsh temperament flowed through it. However, Zen's aura was completely different. His soul was upright, together with the admirable authority of an emperor. It made him comparable to the hope of a dynasty. If Maha was a tyrant, then Zen was a wise emperor. Zen's aura rose to the sky. He didn't cultivate the great dominance technique, but the power of his soul that erupted then was no less than Maha's. The 2 auras clashed, even though the 2 were still far apart. Maha, you are from the fake sacred race. You don't have a noble bloodline. How dare you make me surrender to you? Ha ha, that's ridiculous. Maha, who do you think you are? As he spoke, Zen also activated his roaring token. As a result, the whole universe heard his insults towards Maha. After she was exposed to Zen's aura, Connie in Maha's arms suddenly felt tightness in her chest and shortness of breath. Her mind grew disoriented while her face turned pale. The expression on her face showed how badly she was affected by Zen's aura. I can't believe this. His soul is no weaker than Maha's. How's that possible? What is he? She thought. At this moment, even Maha and the two supreme lords of the sacred race behind him found it hard to believe. Their eyes gawked with surprise and wariness against Zen. Gold fighting soul, Emperor soul imprint, you. Maha was at a loss for words. The expression on his face had grown even bitter. Ha ha ha, Zen laughed out loud. Under the influence of the Emperor soul imprint, his heart was also filled with great heroism, which was completely different from his usual introverted temperament. In a big and brave voice, he said, there are 130 people who have obtained the complete Emperor soul imprint in the divine soul ancestral land of the soul seal race. You, Maha, the #1 godly genius in the sacred race, is only ranked 80th among the 130 people. You didn't even achieve the average rank. But I, Zen, is ranked the first. Do you know your sacred race is a fake one? You are nothing but a fraud. Even if you were from the real sacred race, you wouldn't be able to make me surrender. The aura you possess is incomparable to mine. You are not qualified. You are not qualified. You are not qualified. Zen's voice reverberated through the whole universe. Everyone heard how he mocked Maha in such a brave voice. At that moment, all warriors of the sacred race had a sullen face. Their confusion was accompanied with grim expressions. From the moment they invaded this universe, they had proclaimed that they were the descendants of the sacred race. They established that they were the purest, the oldest and the most perfect race in the divine land. All the other creatures were supposed to be beneath them. However, Zen proclaimed that their sacred race was fake. And this was true. The real sacred race was already extinct. Moreover, the sacred race they were from was only created by Murphy. This was the most intolerable part for the warriors of the fake sacred race. In their eyes, Zen belittled and ridiculed the glory of their sacred race. Additionally, the warriors became even more shocked with Maha's ranking in the divine soul ancestral land. Bewilderment enveloped the warriors as they tried to comprehend Zen's words. Maha was the #1 godly genius in the sacred race. However, Zen said that Maha was only ranked 80th in the divine soul ancestral land. Zen even proclaimed himself as ranked #1. Disbelief and confusion devoured the warriors' minds. They couldn't accept such an absurd truth. The aura of Zen was unable to impact Maha at all. After all, he also had the Emperor soul imprint. Moreover, Maha cultivated the great dominance technique. His control over the aura was more skilled and powerful than that of Zen. If Maha maintained a calm mind, Zen's aura would also be ineffective against him. However, Zen's words struck a nerve and angered Maha. How could Zen be ranked #1 in the divine soul ancestral land? What a ridiculous thought. Maha refused to believe Zen's crazy proclamations. The divine soul ancestral land gathered the top talents from all of the universes. The peerless geniuses from the divine land were also invited there. Maha could accept to be listed in the top 80 since it was quite a good result. However, how could Zen get the first place? Such a result was outrageous and impossible. You mongrel, you are lying. How could that be possible? You don't even have any proof. Maha retorted as he clenched his fists. Rage flowed through his murderous expression. But at that moment, Maha forgot something. They were bickering with each other, and proof would be useless against each other. The two warriors were in a fight of provocations and temperament. The one with a smarter mouth would win while the one who got distracted would suffer a shameful defeat. However, Maha still wanted Zen to provide proof. It was a laughable claim. Zen still held the token of mountain in his hand. If Maha were to make a move, he would activate the token and hide in the fairy palace. After all, he was alone, while Maha had two supreme lords behind him. Maha himself was also a mighty warrior and more than a match for Zen. A strategic retreat for Zen at that situation would not be shameful for him. Before he left, Zen wanted to shake the morale of Maha and the sacred race. You want proof? Okay, you are ranked the 80th. The guy who was ranked 79th is named Faust Liu. The guy who was ranked 81st is called Lacey Zuo. Do you still remember them? Your power is only around the level of those two. I'm ranked first and most powerful. Roche is ranked 3rd while Nathan is 15th. When the three of us entered the list, your ranking immediately dropped to 83rd. What a pity. A weakling like you might fall out of the list soon, Zen said with a laugh. Mockery was explicit in his tone. Actually, there were only a few creatures who could obtain the Emperor's soul imprint in the divine soul ancestral land. After all these years, only 100 or so creatures had successfully done so. It was hard to make Maha fall out of the list. His cultivation was still powerful enough to call him a worthy warrior. However, Zen's goal was to shake the morale of Maha and the sacred race. He exaggerated his claims to make them depressed. Chapter 1593, A War Declaration. Ever since the sacred race invaded the universe, they had been much like a hot knife slicing through butter. Not only did the race continue displaying their own invincible strength, it also promoted the sacred race's noble bloodline. Every time Maha killed a world lord, he used a roaring token to give the announcement of his victim to the entire universe. Constantly, he would spread the news that the sacred race had inherited the most perfect race within the divine land, all races were inferior to them. They were indeed strong enough to do so. With this sort of propaganda, many martial artists were under the illusion that the high and mighty sacred race was invincible. Compared to their perfect race, the human race was lowly. In this situation, many human martial artists were struck with fear before the sacred race. This feeling spread in the hearts of the human warriors, crushing their morale. Zen's current methods were rather simple. The sacred race of the Murphy universe wasn't from the real sacred race, but even if these people were truly inherited from the perfect race of the divine land, he would still make up stories to belittle them. Because first of all, he had to lower the enemy's morale, only then would he be able to save the humans' morale. Now that the roaring token had been activated, his voice spread throughout the entire universe. Countless creatures began listening attentively. Originally, there weren't many rules in a battle between two races. Zen, who was the strongest godly genius of the human race, was quarreling with his counterpart in the sacred race, Maha. There was no need for any sort of rules. So he slandered the sacred race, turning white into black, and then white the lies went on. And Zen showed no hesitation in using such tricks. His opponent, Maha, was undoubtedly arrogant and ruthless, his style vicious and his actions decisive. But as a godly genius, he was used to fighting and killing his enemies. How could he argue like this? Maha had little experience in quibbling. When faced with such a situation, he was momentarily at a loss and had no clue how to respond properly. You nonsense. Such was Maha's only retort. Unfortunately, his counterattack was weak as he stammered, lacking his usual confidence in battle. Hearing Maha's voice, many of the warriors of the sacred race in the evolutionary universe couldn't help but shake their heads. Maha had extraordinary talent and formidable strength, but his quarreling skills were all too lacking. His retort was merely a flick. Not only did it lack any strength, it made clear his flaws. And how could Zen let go of such flaws? I know you're feeling guilty. The trouble with the Murphy universe has yet to be solved. Your false sacred race is in danger of being eliminated as well. The celestial ghost race has gathered 5 true gods and 1,000 supreme lords, they will definitely destroy everything. You can only fight hard and hope to seize our evolutionary universe like a dog that has been disowned. Zen's grip on the roaring token grew tighter as his words grew louder and more fluent. The golden light in his eyes turned more intense as his righteous aura grew more and more majestic. But what he said was nonsense. He had fabricated the point about the celestial ghost race. And as for 1,000 supreme lords, it was impossible for a single universe to have so many. But how could an ordinary warrior know anything about this? Zen's voice projected confidence. Even the warriors of the sacred race couldn't help but wonder whether he was telling the truth. You barbarians fail to walk the right path. Instead, you take the opportunity to invade the evolutionary universe. You've destroyed everything in your path. You've caused great suffering and calamity, unforgivably so. I, Zen Luo, have received great fortune from the heavens. As a godly genius, I shall lead the human race and drive you out of the universe. Warriors, no matter how strong or weak, grab your weapons and follow me into this fight. Zen's speech was decisive. This was certainly his declaration of war. Previously, the sacred race attacked the universe without so much as a declaration. The celestial position race had adopted a policy of appeasement, and for a time, they avoided a fight against the sacred race, even sacrificing thousands of supreme worlds of the Humanity Alliance. In the midst of her wrath, Supreme Lord of Oracle had chosen to confront the sacred race head-on. But after suffering a crushing defeat, she returned. The whole thing had severely damaged the human race's morale. But they couldn't blame the celestial position race and the old leader. After all, the celestial position race existed only to wait for the growth of the godly geniuses. Such was also Mike's plan. But it was flawed, and the sacred race attacked the universe sooner than anticipated. Now that Zen had finally returned, it was time for him to declare war on behalf of the human race. As the words of declaration escaped his mouth, heroic spirit filled the skies and stirred up the pride in the hearts of the countless beings in the universe. The fear they held for the sacred race vanished like smoke in thin air. Good, Zen is indeed the top godly genius. As a member of the universe, we will fight till the last drop of blood. We may be mortals, but we're not afraid of fate. The sacred race is a barbaric one. They may be strong, but they won't bring me to my knees. In the entire universe, warriors of all races and classes, and all sorts of intelligent life forms hidden in underground caves or high up in the starry sky were all boiling with excitement. Ha ha ha! Suddenly, someone burst out in laughter. This voice belonged to Matthias, an ogre supreme lord. Zen, you're a good one. In the past, we ogres wanted to do away with you. I never expected us to join hands against our enemies. The barbarians are nothing to talk about. I'll wipe out all these rebellions of the demon knight race and meet you again. Just as Supreme Lord Matthias finished speaking, another voice was heard. It was the voice of Master Feng, the old leader of the Celestial Position race. Our Celestial Position race is under the secret orders of the universe's master. We will support Zen in fighting the barbarians. Now that Zen has returned, it is time to declare war. We, the Xuanyuan clan, are following the disciple of the master of this universe. We, the Blessed Buddha land. We, the Humanity Alliance. Zen's declaration of war was like a spark thrown into a fire, igniting the entire universe. Several great human powers roared simultaneously as they began declaring war on the sacred race with the roaring tokens. Meanwhile, in a remote supreme world of the Humanity Alliance, the corpses of the warriors of the sacred race had already piled up like a mountain. When these people were still alive, they had all been martial artists at the Soul Sea Realm, Spirit Supreme Realm, or Spirit Transformation Realm. Among them, there were 326 warriors at the Soul Sea Realm, 67 warriors at the Spirit Supreme Realm, and 14 warriors at the Spirit Transformation Realm. A human girl stood at the peak of this corpse-riddled mountain. Her long, nine-colored skirt seemed to dance in the wind. Under her long black hair, her right cheek was badly mutilated and one of her eyeballs had exploded. It was a tragic sight. But from the left side of her face, still in good condition, one could still see her beauty. In front of the young girl stood two world lords of the sacred race. These men were also heavily injured. They floated in the air, gasping for breath as they kept vigilant in the face of the human girl before them. Zen and Maha's argument spreading by the roaring tokens suspended the battle between the two sides. The young girl's gaze never landed on the world lords. At this moment, her eyes were on the sky. Her only remaining eye flickered. The moment she heard Zen's voice, the trace of sadness in her eye disappeared and was replaced with joy and gratification. Did you hear that? The large eye on the girl's face suddenly curved into a crescent moon as she smiled at the world lords. They were stunned. Being fooled by Zen in such a manner was a huge blow to their ego. What nonsense! Kill this woman! The two world lords were growing more irritated and frustrated. The woman's methods were all too terrifying. She had completely annihilated an army of the sacred race right before their eyes. More hateful was that she had come and gone without a trace. She even managed to escape unscathed as she was chased down by a supreme lord of the sacred race. You should have listened. The woman's voice was clear, but it was laced with ice-cold killing intent, void of any emotion. Watching the world lords rush over, she stepped on her wooden clogs and leapt backward, maintaining a posture of free landing. Her severely injured right cheek began recovering rapidly, the wounds in her face shifted and her eyeball was restored to its natural position. In an instant, her beauty was restored. 9 varying streaks of light burst from behind her, forming ribbons that resembled phoenix feathers as they flew towards the two world lords. Listen carefully, Zen is humankind's greatest pride. And these were the last words the world lords heard from the girl before they fell to their deaths. Chapter 1594. The Scattered Godly Geniuses. Within the fiery rock world, huge chunks of rocks glowed red from the intense heat. Two figures rapidly moved through the embers. The moment their tiptoes touched the rocks, they shot forward with exceptional agility. In a blink of an eye, they traveled over 10 miles. Behind these two figures was a grand world lord of the sacred race that chased after them. Those two people were Lucille and Nathan. Holy J had indeed sent the godly geniuses back to the evolutionary universe, however, the grand space spell made it so that the 9 of them were scattered all over the universe. Lucille and Nathan fell into the fiery rock world together. Unfortunately, this world belonged to the Humanity Alliance and was located in the depths of many supreme worlds controlled by the sacred race. Their arrival quickly alarmed the sacred race, which in turn led to them getting chased all over the place by a grand world lord. This hot pursuit, both literally and figuratively, lasted 3 days and 3 nights. You won't be able to escape, the grand world lord said, his voice echoing in the sky. Both Lucille and Nathan had used grand teleportation multiple times but were still unable to shake off the Grand World Lord that chased after them. The two of them had just recently become World Lords and their level wasn't stable yet. It would be extremely difficult for them to defeat their pursuer even if they joined forces. The Grand World Lord suddenly flew higher. There was a cold smile on his face as he looked down at the two young warriors. These two were nothing more than tiny mice scurrying about in his territory. Sky Crush. He waved his hand and formed a mysterious seal. Black rays of light appeared in the sky and continuously spread to form a shape. It seemed as if a corner of the horizon had been cut off to be shaped into a dark, formidable hand, which came crushing down. Nathan's eyes flashed as he looked up at what was happening. Grand teleportation. Lucille nodded before a bright flash appeared underneath their feet and made them disappear. Their pursuer sneered. He too employed grand teleportation and quickly followed after them. This Grand World Lord's cultivation was much more stable than that of the young warriors, so he could travel a distance 10 times longer than they could. Before teleporting, he also managed to spread his perception within a 1,000-mile range and pinpointed their location. Whoosh whoosh. They were on top of a blazing mountain about 100 miles away. As soon as they landed, the Grand World Lord also appeared just a couple of feet away. Obviously, they failed to distance themselves from their pursuer, and worse, the sacred Grand World Lord was now closer to them. Sizzle. This flaming mountain range was a field of fire all year round. The rocks were cracked and spewed out streaks of scorching flames. Nathan held his spear while Lucille's hands glowed from the 5 elements. It seemed that escape was no longer an option. You can't escape, so you want to fight it out. The sacred Grand World Lord laughed. Finally, their game of cat and mouse had come to an end and he could finally kill these two pathetic rats. He had already killed 12 human world lords after he entered the evolutionary universe, so these two shouldn't be too much of a problem. I'm quite curious though, how could there be such stupid warriors like you? Did you get lost and stumble upon this place? The Grand World Lord asked. He had already repeated this question thrice along the way but neither of the two answered him. The fiery rock world was the Humanity Alliance's hinterland, so there was no need to station too many powerful warriors there. There also wasn't any blood curse technique that was used to guard this place. If the human race wanted to take over this fiery rock world, they would have to attack the supreme worlds that lay at its borders. It was impossible for them to succeed as the boundaries were heavily guarded by the sacred race. Just as the Grand World Lord was about to make his move, Maha's and Zen's voices echoed throughout the universe. The Grand World Lord wore a puzzled expression as he listened. Even Nathan and Lucille had smug smiles on their faces as they listened to Zen's voice. This guy, does he have to make a scene when he just came back? Lucille laughed, shaking her head. HMPH, he has stolen the limelight all over again, Nathan grumbled. Zen and Maha's conversation puzzled the Grand World Lord greatly. He then turned his gaze towards Lucille and Nathan and suddenly realized something. These two weren't running very fast, nor was there any sign of haste in their escape. There was even a time when the two of them simply ran back and forth around the edge of the fiery rock world. It seemed they didn't have any intention of getting rid of him. It was a bit strange, but the Grand World Lord simply brushed it off back then. These two had only recently become World Lords, so he didn't really think they'd be that much of a threat to him. Since he was a bit bored, he indulged and chased them around a bit for some exercise. However, upon more careful consideration, it seemed they weren't really trying to escape. Instead, it seemed they had wanted to lure him away. For 3 days and 3 nights, these two had managed to shake off his subordinates. He was the only one that remained to chase after them. Did they honestly think that they could defeat him if they joined forces? That was ridiculous. They were mere world lords. He was sure to crush them under his foot. However, after Maha revealed Zen's status as a godly genius, a thought suddenly crossed the Grand World Lord's mind. Why did these two warriors get lost? Because they didn't come here from the thoughtless minds. The two of them came from a place far beyond this universe. They came from the divine refinement forbidden land. These two were godly geniuses. The puzzled expression on the Grand World Lord's face instantly cleared. Nathan noticed this and couldn't help but sneer. It's time. It has already begun, Lucille said with a charming smile. Rumble. A massive hand suddenly appeared beneath the Grand World Lord. This giant hand was made of rocks, courtesy of Lucille, who could freely control any of the original laws. Before he could even react, the Grand World Lord found himself firmly caught by the giant hand. To say he was panicking was an understatement. He didn't know who these two godly geniuses were nor just how strong they could be. However, he knew Maha, and he was the #1 godly genius in the Murphy universe. It seemed that the Grand World Lord might have bitten off more than he could chew. These godly geniuses, strength far surpassed that of ordinary warriors at the same level, which meant that dying in their hands was now a huge possibility. However, this huge hand made of rocks could only bind him and caused no substantial damage. At that moment, he really wanted to use the grand teleportation to escape this sudden predicament. However, this grand teleportation wasn't something that could be used instantly. It required a certain process. As a Grand World Lord, he would need a few seconds to activate it. What a fool, Lucille exclaimed. Just as he was about to activate the grand teleportation, the giant hand tightened around him and smashed him ruthlessly onto the ground. Boom! The impact put him in a daze. The space law he had just released formed a blazing white channel on the spot he was smashed into, but it was already too late since he was already gone from that spot. The grand teleportation failed. If he was a bit more relaxed and level-headed, the Grand World Lord could have broken free from the giant hand first and then used the grand teleportation. However, in his panic, he put the cart before the horse, which led to his failure in teleporting. Now it would take him a minute before he could activate it once more. Nathan wasn't going to grant him that luxury. The young man grasped his spear and shot it towards the Grand World Lord while his eyes emitted a formidable cyan light. To Nathan, the entire world had now turned into countless thin lines and dots. Weak spot, Nathan murmured as he charged. He had already found the Grand World Lord's weak spot. He rolled his spear in his hand and aimed to kill with one shot. The Grand World Lord couldn't help but quake in the face of Nathan's lost spear strike. This was a life or death crisis. Dream on, beast spirits, devour, roar, roar, roar. Above his head, a scroll quickly unfurled. From it burst forth powerful vicious beasts that pounced towards Nathan. These beast spirits were incredibly ferocious, however, all Nathan could see were lines and dots. They could not withstand even a single blow. So lame. In Nathan's eyes, he could see all those beast spirits had weak points all over their bodies. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The truth godly way was extremely powerful, to begin with. Even a Supreme Lord would have no chance of surviving Nathan's spear, much less these beast spirits. Nathan thrust his spear into the air, shattering all the beast spirits. In the blink of an eye, it reached the Grand World Lord's neck. Even if you kill me, you won't be able to leave this place. This is the core supreme world of our sacred race. He spat bitterly. Nathan smiled. You don't have to worry about that. The spear was gentle and left only a small bloody hole in the Grand World Lord's neck. A long, slender crack formed from that hole until his entire body was split apart like porcelain. Nathan lightly shook his spear to get rid of the blood. We need to find a place to hide. I wonder when they will come and save us, Lucille murmured with worry. The Grand World Lord was right, it would be incredibly difficult for them to leave this place. Don't worry, Zen has already revealed himself. My father will definitely figure out where we are through calculation and bring us back, Nathan said with confidence. The sacred race was unable to calculate anything within the evolutionary universe because they were unable to communicate with the heavens. There was no way the heavens of the evolutionary universe would help these invaders. Now that Zen had caused such a commotion, everyone now knew that the godly geniuses had returned. Both the human race and sacred race would try their best to find them, however, this was going to be a challenging task for the sacred race. The evolutionary universe was too big and locating one godly genius would be like trying to find a needle in a haystack. However, it would be really easy for the supreme lords of the evolutionary universe to find them through calculation. The only trouble was, would any Supreme Lord dare enter the fiery rock world to come to their rescue? Chapter 1595. Return to the Fairy Palace. Originally, Maha had planned on using the Great Dominance technique in order to force Zen into submitting to him. What he hadn't taken into consideration was the possibility that he would be reproved and taught a lesson by Zen. Furthermore, Zen's words had even aroused the population's common hatred in the evolutionary universe. Maha's face grew long as he listened the roars coming from the universe. Maha led the sacred martial artists to slaughter humans through the entire process, completely suppressing the human morale. Following such, the Demon Knight's rebellion had been a fatal blow to the human race. Although the ogre race had interfered at that point in time, the three human forces still suffered from low morale. Now though, thanks to Zen's horrendous words, Maha's previous efforts seemed to have been in vain. Don't let him utter another word, Maha coldly ordered. This time, he didn't want the responsibility of having to stop Zen on his own. Although he had failed to subdue Zen with the Great Dominance technique, there was no reason to say he couldn't eventually control him. In fact, there were several different methods for enslaving a martial artist. For all Maha cared, it didn't matter how eloquent Zen was, and there was no way he would escape his grasp. The two sacred supreme lords behind Maha had long since had this same intention, and secretly criticized Maha in their minds. Both of them believed that Maha shouldn't engage in so much conversation with Zen. In a certain way, they were right, too. Now, Maha couldn't seem to get the upper hand on this argument. Even worse, Zen had managed to retort with ease, and just like that, Maha found himself at a disadvantage. In the eyes of the two sacred supreme lords, it was better for Maha to catch Zen directly and enslave him at once. By then, Zen would no longer be anywhere capable of resisting. And because Zen was trapped in the seven ultimate world, he could be compared to a piece of meat on the chopping block. It would be easy for them to catch and kill him. As Maha gave the order, Supreme Lord Noel of the sacred race reached out his hand in a first attempt to grab Zen. His arm was like a long fish as it instantly pierced through space, appearing beside Zen and clawing at his head. Zen was actually extremely vigilant, though. Before Maha had even given the order, he had already activated the grand teleportation technique. With the release of a blazing white stream from the power of space, Zen was capable of escaping hundreds of miles away in the blink of an eye, avoiding Supreme Lord Noel's grasp. "Do you really think you can escape?" Supreme Lord Noel uttered calmly. It was too late. He had already left an imprint on Zen's body. No matter where Zen moved from now on, Supreme Lord Noel would be able to detect him in an instant. Through his eyes, Zen looked like a little sheep running on the plains. No matter how fast he tried to move, he couldn't escape the falcon's pursuit. Supreme Lord Noel thought he could let Zen run away as fast as possible, let him waste his energy first, and then catch him after he fell into despair. Maha, Connie, and Supreme Lord Barry also thought the same. Thus, while the three of them watched Zen escape, they equally looked calm, their faces expressionless. Just as Supreme Lord Noel was about to use his spatial transference to chase after Zen, he was suddenly stunned. His eyes quickly revealed a deep feeling of disbelief. Maha, who held Connie in his arms, was calming his mind and thinking about how to deal with Zen. He thought that after he had completely enslaved Zen, he would be able to use Zen's godly genius identity to suppress the human race. Besides that, Zen seemed to be a deep source of surprises and secrets. The roaring token in that guy's hand seems to be a strange item that can be used repeatedly. So interesting. Although Maha was deep in his thoughts, he couldn't help but notice Supreme Lord Noel's expression. Out of curiosity, he asked, "What's wrong?" "He has disappeared." Supreme Lord Noel's expression looked everything but natural. His features were distorting themselves. "What?" Maha questioned in a shocked tone, his complexion suddenly changing to a pale, washed-out hue. Supreme Lord Barry, who had remained silent up until now, was just as surprised. He immediately released his perception, and everything within 1,000 miles appeared in his mind. A Supreme Lord's perception was extremely strong. It was impossible for any living creature within 1,000 miles to escape such detection. "He really has disappeared," Supreme Lord Barry uttered with disbelief. He had quickly come to the realization that Supreme Lord Noel was right. Zen had truly disappeared. "That is the place where he was last seen," Supreme Lord Noel suddenly pronounced before he frowned anew, and his figure disappeared from its original place immediately. Supreme Lord Barry also seemed to have sensed that something was amiss and instantly activated the grand teleportation technique too. Perhaps all hope wasn't lost. On a small hill 100 miles away from the southern side of Ultimate Immortal City, there was a small mini fairy palace that was in the process of appearing. In midair, the fairy palace slowly rotated. It looked extremely exquisite, as though it was a toy constructed by a nimble craftsman. As the two Supreme Lords, Maha, and the other sacred martial artists moved in that direction, they couldn't help but take notice of this small fairy palace. "Is it a space treasure?" Maha's lips curved upward, his face revealing a trace of ridicule. Zen's breath literally just disappeared from this place, seconds ago. "He must have entered this fairy palace," Supreme Lord Noel said, as he stared at the fairy palace which continued rotating slowly, almost obnoxiously. Maha nodded his head in a single gesture. After seeing this fairy palace, he breathed a sigh of despair. If Zen had really run away right before their very eyes, then they had brought shame upon themselves. Moreover, Maha knew that Murphy's primary goal was to capture these godly geniuses. If Zen really did run away, then even Maha was likely to face a very severe punishment. "Come out, Zen, it's meaningless to hide inside. I didn't expect you to be the cowardly type," Maha said, indifferently. A mere space treasure wasn't even worth Maha's attention. The mini fairy palace didn't reply. Instead, it only continued slowly rotating in the same spot. Maha pointed his finger at the palace and instructed, "Break this space treasure. This little fairy palace is really quite exquisite. After forcing Zen out of it, do you think I can have it, perhaps?" Connie stared at the fairy palace, eyes wide with interest. Maha gently stroked Connie's cheek and chuckled. "Of course you can have it." That was when Supreme Lord Noel's gaze fell upon the fairy palace. He suddenly extended both his hands forward, grabbing onto the tiny fairy palace. He released a terrifying, unexpected bout of power. Nether divine kill. Streams of space law's white power formed a small space tornado in his hand, enveloping the mini fairy palace whole. Supreme Lord Noel immediately imagined how this space-killing skill could instantly mince the fairy palace into tiny pieces. The spiraling tornado continued its attack. However, it didn't seem to have any effect on the fairy palace. In fact, the palace didn't even budge at all. "Huh, what's going on here?" Another expression of surprise was now exposed on Supreme Lord Noel's face. Maha glanced at Supreme Lord Noel indifferently, and suddenly, Supreme Lord Noel began to feel embarrassed. He was a Supreme Lord, but even he was unable of breaking through a tiny space treasure. In other words, he felt like a complete disgrace. "Grand divine cutting!" Supreme Lord Noel shouted fiercely this time. He tried his best at attacking the fairy palace. He focused on cultivating the space law because its power was truly formidable. Several transparent space sabers immediately appeared around the fairy palace. At once, these sabers started stabbing and lancing at the fairy palace in an attempt to destroy it. Clang, bang, bam, as the space sabers slashed down with great force, a series of loud sounds could be heard. After about 30 seconds, Supreme Lord Noel, Supreme Lord Barry, Maha, Connie, and the world lords of the sacred race were all staring at each other, their eyes wide. Everyone's face displayed an astonished, shocked and confused expression. From the very beginning, they hadn't thought much of the fairy palace. No matter how strong the space treasure was, its defensive power was still limited. If a Supreme Lord were to take action to attack it, it would be destroyed. Clearly though, they had underestimated this fairy palace. 10 years ago, this very same expression had appeared on the faces of many Supreme Lords in the evolutionary universe. "Is it fun?" Zen's voice roared throughout the universe and transmitted, reaching and booming into Maha's and the others' ears. "If you want to capture me, you'll first have to see if you have the qualifications to break through this space treasure." Upon hearing Zen's words, many of the Supreme Lords in the evolutionary universe couldn't help but break out in laughter. It was clear to them that Zen had entered that fairy palace again. From the start, they hadn't worried about Zen's safety whatsoever. Together, they had personally witnessed the toughness of this fairy palace. In the past, many Supreme Lords had given everything they could against it, but they simply couldn't destroy it. In the end, a few of them had been killed by the desperate melee. "You brat, you!" Maha felt like he was going crazy. Where did Zen find such a magical space treasure? "Supreme Lord Barry, go forth and destroy this space treasure," Maha ordered. At once, Supreme Lord Barry specialized in studying all kinds of poisons, and the heavenly destiny he carried was the life law. In terms of killing technique, Supreme Lord Barry was extremely proficient in it. However, the destructive power he created was inferior to Supreme Lord Noel's. Now though, since Maha had already asked him to make a move, he would still give it a try. He quickly stretched out his hands, causing his arms to turn black with traces of phosphorescence. This phosphorescence was a poison that boosted his strength, capable of turning his hands into a pair of all-conquering toxic weapon in a short amount of time. The venomous hands grabbed the fairy palace, and suddenly began emitting a wild, savage power as they kneaded and pulsed at the fairy palace. Crack, 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 a crushing sound could be heard. His greatest desire at that moment was to forcibly break open the fairy palace with his 2 hands. However, the fairy palace didn't give. Not even an inch. It continued spinning, at its own casual speed, in front of them. A look of bleak awkwardness appeared on Supreme Lord Barry's face. He was also beginning to understand and sympathize with Supreme Lord Noel's predicament. Chapter 1596, Jeffrey's Talent. Maha's eyes narrowed as he stared at the fairy palace in front of him. He stood motionless for a long time and then, in a very cold tone he said, "I'll let my father take action." The sacred race was a centralized society, and this was the only force in the Murphy universe. The status of Supreme Lords wasn't equal. Rather, they were arranged like a pyramid. Maha's father was the strongest Supreme Lord in the sacred race. In his mind, he was certain that there was something he could do about a mere space treasure. Just as he finished speaking though, a ripple of space law descended upon the fairy palace, causing it to fall downward. In the blink of an eye, the fairy palace had completely disappeared. Once again, Maha and his group found them stunned out of amazement. They looked at each other in dismay. One after the other, they began attempting all sorts of different techniques in order to search for the fairy palace. Despite their greatest efforts, there was simply no sign of the fairy palace. It was clear that it didn't matter how hard they tried. Maha had to come to terms with what was happening. His enraged roar rang out from the hillside, booming the ultimate immortal city. In the fairy palace, Zen held a teleportation token in his hand, and presented a faint smile on his face. The token of mountain and the teleportation token, combined together, allowed him to bring the fairy palace anywhere in the universe. That was when Zen brought the fairy palace into the space created by the teleportation token. In this space, he had the will to choose any supreme world to descend upon. Behind him, on the square in the fairy palace, stood a group of people. Their eager gazes were all turned in his direction. The last time Zen had returned to the great world, he had installed all his relatives from the cloud hall in the fairy palace. The universe was filled with a multitude of dangers. The fairy palace was most likely the safest place in the universe. More so, the fairy palace was completely under Zen's control. It could be said that even if the universe collapsed, the fairy palace would still remain intact. As long as he didn't connect the fairy palace's projection to this place, no one else would even be able to find it. Amongst the crowd, Letitia's beautiful eyes were fixed on Zen. Over the past decade, she seldom had the chance to meet Zen. Every time they crossed paths, they'd have to part again soon. However, she never complained because she knew her husband carried a great destiny. Since she couldn't help her husband, she could only quietly wait in the fairy palace, but there was no one who could listen to the pain in her heart. Zen. Letitia tiptoed lightly and rushed to Zen's side in a flash. Her ice-cold hand touched Zen's face, and her eyes were filled with love and boundless tenderness. Watching the scene, Imogen and the others felt gratified. At least Zen had returned safely. After returning to the fairy palace, Zen wasn't in a rush to join the celestial position race. Instead, he decided to stay there temporarily. After embracing Letitia for a while, Zen asked softly, "Where's Jeffrey?" He hadn't seen his son in the square. 4 years ago, when Zen met Jeffrey, he was only 7 years old. Now, 4 years had passed, and Jeffrey had already turned 11. At that time, Jeffrey had still been a young, careless kid. Zen wondered how he was doing now. As Letitia heard Zen's question, her face displayed a look of rebuke. Zen wasn't a qualified father, but she still couldn't bring herself to criticize her husband. "He's at the library," Letitia replied with a smile. "The library?" Zen asked, astonished. Prior to leaving, he had given Letitia the token for the library, so they could visit and leave freely. They had to hide in the fairy palace for a few years and it was impossible to forever keep them in the square. It was only natural that they'd get bored. Letitia's face and eyes twinkled with pride. "You'll see after you go to the library." At Letitia's reaction, Zen felt even more confused and curious. He turned on his heel and headed straight for the library. The moment he entered the library, he saw Jeffrey seated before a massive book. From the looks of it, he was currently contemplating the book's contents. Just as Zen was about to speak, Immortal book beside him hurriedly made a gesture of silence. Letitia also quickly extended 2 slender fingers and pressed them against Zen's mouth. "Don't disturb him," Letitia hastily said. Zen's face was filled with astonishment. What had his son been doing over the past few years? Zen had spent little time with his son since he was born, and the first time they met 4 years ago, they had only been together for a few short months. This, of course, had no effect on how much he truly loved his son. Because both Immortal book and Letitia had stopped him from disturbing Jeffrey, Zen withheld his desire to say anything and waited instead. After a long while, Jeffrey exhaled slightly. He lifted his head and his eyes shot in Zen's direction. His eyes flickered and a heroic look surfaced on his face. He smiled and greeted Zen, "Father, you're back." Hearing Jeffrey call him father, Zen was moved with emotion. He had this weird feeling that his son had grown up overnight, and was overjoyed. Immortal book also chuckled. "Jeffrey, did you learn anything today?" Jeffrey nodded. "From memory, I can now write down the contents of this book." Immortal book appeared very satisfied with Jeffrey's statement. With a wave of his hand, a few pieces of paper floated toward Jeffrey. "Do it now, otherwise, you'll forget about it later." Jeffrey smiled politely. "You clearly know that I am gifted with an extraordinary memory. I won't forget anything I see. I know you just want to test me." Immortal Book didn't blush, although he was caught red-handed in his lie. He laughed away the awkward atmosphere. The palest ink is still better than the best of memory. This sort of thing has to be written down. After all, it involves so many subjects. As Zen listened to the conversation between the two, the doubt in his mind increased, causing the features on his face to deepen. What was Jeffrey doing? He walked up and asked, "What does Jeffrey have to write?" Immortal Book glanced at Zen and exclaimed at once, "Your son is extraordinary." Extraordinary. In Zen's memories, Jeffrey did seem to have some talents for divine textures. Ever since his birth though, Zen had never imparted him any of the divine texture techniques. Why did Immortal Book say Jeffrey was extraordinary? Zen was completely unable to understand what was going on. Seeing Zen's expression, Immortal Book asked faintly, "Zen, do you know the origin of the grand weapon refining method?" Zen hadn't been sure before, but after his trip to the divine refinement forbidden land, he had discovered such for himself. The grand weapon refining method should come from those who are referred to as extraordinary creatures, Zen replied. Immortal Book chuckled once again. The concept of extraordinary creature was suggested by my master. The person who told you that is probably Holy J, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. Zen just nodded. Every golden Sanskrit word of the grand weapon refining method records a large amount of information. In addition to the grand weapon refining method, there are also several other cultivation techniques. However, my master failed to decipher all of them, Immortal Book said. Yes, I know, Zen nodded in agreement. Although the grand weapon refining method was still working on Zen's body, Bromley, Holy J and Zen himself didn't know the meaning of the golden Sanskrit. They only knew several words. For the past 4 years, Jeffrey has been staying in the library. With time, he has managed to decode 9 golden Sanskrit words. Immortal Book's face revealed pride. Pure pride. Jeffrey's interest in the Sanskrit words in the library was clearly directed and delegated by him. At first, a few years back, Jeffrey was very mischievous and treated the library as a place to play hide and seek. However, Immortal Book had shown him quite a number of interesting toys, and he quickly became deeply engrossed. Every day, after a short period of cultivation, he spent the rest of his time in the library, constantly reading Holy Bromley's books and also trying to study the golden Sanskrit words, as if they had a unique magical attraction on him. Despite the benefits of the library for Jeffrey, Letitia had her doubts and remained worried. Imogen had even stopped Jeffrey from going there for a while. Immortal Book, on the other hand, was convinced of Jeffrey's extraordinary talent in this area, and he persuaded Letitia and Imogen by telling them the golden Sanskrit words' importance. If Jeffrey was successful in this area, his achievements would be far greater than Zen's. In Letitia's eyes, her husband was an existence that could never be surpassed, but Immortal Book had said that Jeffrey just might. If she could really nurture Jeffrey into a talent like her husband, then of course, she'd be willing to do so. And over the years, aside from trying to understand Bromley's speculations, Jeffrey also attempted to decipher the golden Sanskrit words, at which he was truly successful. This was something that Immortal Book had never thought completely possible. You mean, Jeffrey can decipher the golden Sanskrit words? Zen's eyes widened as he looked at Jeffrey, standing not very far off, with an expression of disbelief. Jeffrey couldn't help but smile shyly upon seeing his father's shocked expression. Letitia and Immortal Book were also pleased to see Zen's surprise. Zen was exceptionally outstanding in all aspects, but Jeffrey's ability to decipher the golden Sanskrit words far surpassed Zen's. Therefore, Letitia felt proud. Proud and accomplished. Quick, show me the Sanskrit words you've deciphered, Zen said excitedly. He began to feel a little anxious, as he was well aware of what this meant. Jeffrey's expression was very calm. After taking out a writing brush and paper, he began to write down the contents that he had deciphered. It hadn't taken him very long at all to get through over 1,000 words. Chapter 1597, A Heavy Sword. Although Jeffrey was only 11 years old, he had wonderful handwriting, much like the style of a famous calligrapher. Zen just stood silently beside Jeffrey and watched him write. The longer he watched, the more amazed he felt. It was only one word of golden Sanskrit, but he had written over 1,000 words to explain it. Just like Holy J had said, these top extraordinary creatures were advanced beings. Their ways of existence and communication were difficult to understand. At this stage, the entire divine land was still trying to comprehend these extraordinary creatures. Furthermore, they had only obtained a portion of this race's language. There was no other way to explain it. Understanding them was hardship. When Jeffrey had written out the last word, he looked up and smiled at Zen. Immortal Book eagerly reached out his hand to snatch the piece of manuscript, but Jeffrey slightly moved his hand and passed it to Zen. Immortal Book could do nothing but glare at Jeffrey. He couldn't do anything about Jeffrey, let alone to Zen, who was his owner. Zen grabbed his son's manuscript and began to read it word by word, the curiosity no longer just an expression but an action. The golden Sanskrit word seems to be used to describe a certain place's scenery. It seems to be a lake, doesn't it? Zen asked. Jeffrey nodded and answered, probably. Besides, this lake would be outside of the Divine Land. You know about the Divine Land? Zen could barely believe what he was hearing, especially from his son's mouth. Jeffrey rolled his eyes, giving him the look of a real old soul, as if it was only normal for him to know about the Divine Land. Immortal Book next to him chuckled anew and said, this little guy has been very diligent these past years. He has read through many ancient books in the library. He may know even more than you, Zen. Zen couldn't help but feel quite ashamed. Even though he had opened the library, he hadn't spent much time reading. Generally speaking, he acted like a utilitarian. He only took the cultivation methods that he needed from the library. Needless to say, Zen wasn't to blame because he had always been troubled by many crises, leaving him little time to spend on reading. Even right now, Zen still had a heavy burden on him. Jeffrey was intelligent, and he should have also inherited Zen's talent. Although he had no intention for training in martial arts, he would naturally be capable of achieving good results if he put his talent forth on something else. Zen quickly skimmed through the 1,000 words and grasped a general idea of what it said. The owner of this fairy palace, Zen's master, Bromley, was still traveling in the endless chaos. In the Chaotic Storm Chronicle, there was a record of Bromley's passage through the chaos. In his exploration, Bromley hadn't discovered any other civilizations. In the endless chaos, other than the boundless chaotic energy, there was nothing but an unbreakable lightning bolt. It was an empty and lonely world. According to Jeffrey's manuscript, the golden Sanskrit word seemed to record the existence of a huge lake amidst the chaos. It was a dark blue lake, which was fairly large. But as to the specific area of the body of water, Jeffrey couldn't describe it. After all, the extraordinary creature's distance scale was completely different from that of the Divine Land. The lake was located somewhere in the depths of the chaos. As for whether or not the lake was a gathering place for extraordinary creatures, it was impossible to tell from the golden Sanskrit word. It's a pity that the information recorded in the golden Sanskrit word isn't of much value, Zen said regretfully after reading it. At Zen's most recent utterances, Saul and Immortal Book both immediately laughed. This was already quite a shocking discovery, said Immortal Book, shaking his head at Zen. Then he added, in the Divine Land, the value of this piece of manuscript is hard to imagine. You'll know when you go there. Saul also nodded in agreement and said, Master, you have indeed underestimated the value of this golden Sanskrit word. The Divine Land was an unknown world to Zen. After countless eras of development, the entire Divine Land had already reached its peak. When civilization reached this step, the only way was to expand outwards. But that endless chaos actually covered the Divine Land, and the place looked like a lonely island. In this case, the golden Sanskrit represented the information that was outside of the island. Even if the record was boring, it still had an extraordinary value in the Divine Land, not to mention the fact that it was about a lake. In the future, when Zen went to the Divine Land and learned the value of this translation, he would have a different understanding of it, and would even marvel at how precious it was. Zen could only understand a small part of what Immortal Book and Saul had said. He revealed a gratified expression and said, Jeffrey has indeed grown up. With that, he handed the stack of papers over to Immortal Book. After reading it himself, Immortal Book carefully stored it away with the others. That was when the small group of people suddenly heard a series of banging sounds coming from the entrance of the library. Zen, you're back, an iron puppet charged into the library. Upon seeing the individual, Letitia slightly stepped in front of her son in order to protect him. Her face revealed a trace of vigilance. They had stayed in the fairy palace for a few years now, so they had long since known that there was a strange iron-made monster in the weapon refining workshop. This puppet was different from Immortal Book and Saul, though. Immortal Book was amiable and approachable, while Saul was extremely respectful. Most importantly, the two of them actually looked no different from regular humans. As for the iron-made monster in the weapon refining workshop, not only did he have a strange personality, his appearance was also unnatural, like an iron man stuck in a glass jar. Livingston, Zen bared his teeth when he saw the iron-made man. Livingston walked clatteringly to Zen and circled around him a few times, continuously sizing up Zen's physical body. He finally stammered his question, Are you still Zen? Livingston asked this because he sensed a trace of an unusual aura coming off Zen. Boom, boom. Then Livingston reached out his hand, his iron pincer, rather, and struck Zen's body. What happened to your body? He asked, in a rather agitated voice. When others simply looked at Zen, they only felt that his cultivation base had increased, and perhaps that his aura had become more pure and calm overall. Livingston, on the other hand, could clearly see that there had been an extraordinary change in Zen's body. Deep inside himself, he felt that Zen's physical body had undergone a qualitative change. It was as if Zen had encountered an extremely skilled weapon refiner who had transformed his physical body. If he were to compare the Zen of the past with the Zen of the present, then the former would resemble a pile of scrap metal next to the latter. This was an instinctive feeling for Livingston. What made him even more bewildered was the method for tempering Zen. Such was a powerful one, far beyond his own imagination. This is so strange. Zen, where in the world did you receive such tempering? It had only been a few years since Zen had left the fairy palace. Livingston could clearly see the traces of time engraved on Zen's body. Hearing this, Zen smiled slightly but omitted to reply right away. Strictly speaking, Zen was over 80,000 years old now, but his bones couldn't accurately reflect his true age. Because Zen held his silence, Livingston too stopped asking. He chuckled and said, Since you've returned, I'll show you the results. Follow me, quickly. Once Livingston had finished speaking, he grabbed Zen and began dragging him at running speed toward the weapon refining workshop. At the sight of his father being dragged away by Livingston, Jeffrey couldn't help but immediately follow them. Jeffrey was at the age where curiosity usually got the best of him. He was curious about everything. He was interested in every part of the fairy palace, and the weapon refining workshop was no exception. This iron monster, though, was too bizarre. His mother never allowed him to go near the weapon refining workshop anyway. Now that he had his father leading the way, Jeffrey naturally felt like he had nothing to fear. When he arrived at the weapon refining workshop, Livingston suddenly struck the enormous weapon refining furnace. Clank! With a crisp sound, the furnace's mouth clanged open. Within the furnace, there was a long, thin and sharp treasure sword, shining with a dazzling shimmer. Is this the sword embryo? Zen asked. Livingston's face revealed a proud look and he replied, laughingly, this heavy sword, made from star essence iron, is basically formed. It's just that there's a little problem with the sword hilt. The little problem Livingston spoke of was actually an extremely fatal one. This sword was too heavy. Chapter 1598. The Great Weighty Sword. Ever since Zen sent Livingston to the weapon refining workshop, the latter had been immersed in perfecting the sword embryo. He'd spent day and night working on it, making sure it was in excellent condition and ready for battle. Though the sword embryo was unfinished, its weight was unbelievably heavy. This made it unfeasible for anyone to use it. To put it into perspective, the 4-inch sword weighed as much as an entire great world. Even a supreme lord would struggle to lift a sword that was forged from the star essence iron. It was simply impossible to use it freely. However, Saul gave him a solution. He suggested Livingston should use the mystical infinity stone to forge a sword hilt and inlay the blade of the long sword into the sword hilt. The infinity stone was very special because it had the power to change the weight of other things. When Livingston first entered the workshop, Saul gave him a pair of pincers made from the infinity stone, so it made it possible to lift the sword embryo. In the refining workshop, other than this pair of pincers, there is only a small piece of infinity stone. I don't have enough material to forge a complete sword hilt, Livingston said, with a hint of sadness. Though professionals were usually perfectionists in their fields, what was admirable about Livingston was that he could admit to his flaws. The lack of infinity stone discouraged him, and he knew it wasn't enough to finish the sword hilt. In the end, the only thing he could do was to give up. After I mixed the infinity stone with other materials, I successfully forged this sword hilt, Livingston said in a regretful tone. It's a pity, it can only reduce the weight of the sword by half. Reduce its weight by half. Zen smiled as he spoke, already with a plan in mind. His strength had greatly increased, but for some reason, he couldn't obtain a suitable weapon. He took a look at the sword and knew he'd need it. Livingston nodded, and then used the pincers to take out the sword from the furnace, presenting it to Zen. Just as Livingston described, there was an exquisite cyan sword hilt at the end of the blade. Livingston had spent several years to forge that sword hilt, but he wasn't very proud of it. Who in the world could carry the weight of this sword in battle? It became useless. Alas, the amount of infinity stone is too small. I'm afraid you won't be able to even use it, Livingston sighed. I wanted to melt the pincers and use them for the sword, but Saul didn't like that idea. I could only compromise with him. Not to worry, I think I have a solution. As he spoke, Livingston's expression grew excited. He laid the sword by the furnace, and took out a beautiful sword sheath which was tucked away in the workshop. This sword sheath is a Sumeru space, made from the Skybeam mine. I spent a lot of time making this sheath, Livingston smugly said. Tell me, what's so special about the Sumeru space? Zen asked. He had no idea what Livingston was up to. Livingston gripped the sword with the pincers before stuffing it into the sheath. The sword blade was completely embedded inside, revealing only the exquisite hilt. It was evident that the sheath was made especially for the sword. Now you can wield this sword without trouble, Livingston said, handing the sheath to Zen. Seeing that Zen's brows still pinched together, Livingston explained, it's impossible for an ordinary Sumeru space to contain such a heavy object. However, if made by the Skybeam mine, it can bear the weight of the sword. Zen held onto the sword in his hand and asked curiously, so what? That way, you'll be able to run around with the sword with the sheath controlling its weight, Livingston said with a smile. And, when you meet your opponent, all you'll have to do is take the sword out and do what you need to do. Relying on the weight of the star essence iron, it can crush many warriors at once. The sword does have the weight of a great world, after all. Ha ha, Livingston said, smirking. Huh, what, are you kidding me? Zen and the group of people behind him were in awe with what he just said. Jeffrey, who was just 11 years old, was stunned to hear this. However, he understood what Livingston meant. The sword was extremely heavy as everyone knew. Not even a Supreme Lord could lift it up with ease. The creation of this sheath made it transportable. Livingston was resourceful with it, using the Sumeru space to make it in the first place. Because this sword blade was located in the Sumeru space, its weight wouldn't be transmitted to the sheath. The only problem was Livingston's suggestion for Zen to take the sword out of its sheath and smash it toward his opponents. It was unfeasible and frankly, not very noble. What was Livingston even thinking? Mom, what he said makes sense I guess. But how can Dad even take his sword back after he smashes it against his opponents? Wouldn't it just sink straight into the depths of the ground? Jeffrey asked Letitia in a low voice. Ignore him, boy, I knew he was going nuts. Letitia was also speechless. If she recalled correctly, the first time she followed her husband into the fairy palace, Livingston wasn't there. She didn't know where Zen had found Livingston in the first place. She couldn't believe that Livingston had created such a useless sword after staying in the workshop for all these years. Zen fiddled with the sheath in his hands and said, does this sword have a name? I've already thought of the name long ago. It's called the Great Weighty Sword, Livingston responded. Zen didn't expect much. He just nodded and grabbed the hilt of the sword with one hand. Hello, Great Weighty Sword. Not bad at all. After he finished speaking, he began to revolve his strength, getting ready to bring out the sword. You can't just pull the sword out like that. Livingston panicked and tried to stop him. This sword is too heavy. The weight. Before he could finish, Zen had already activated his 8-path platforms, and the power of 9 divine stars in his body began to accumulate. With Zen's current strength, it was enough to bear a considerable portion of the power of the 9 divine stars. He didn't need to use the cross-world Thurgy to transfer his strength. He merely pulled the heavy sword out of its sheath. When he saw the sword slowly being pulled out of the sheath, Livingston's voice began to stutter. Even though he used the Infinity Stone and reduced the weight by half, this sword in Zen's hand was still as heavy as half of a great world. The weight of that is comparable to half of a great world. Half a great world, how can you? The words finally came out of Livingston's mouth. Everyone was in shock the moment they heard Livingston. Everyone knew that the weight of the sword was not to be joked about. Otherwise, no one would have been so interested in the first place. The fact that it was impossible to use made it so intriguing. They didn't think Zen would have been able to pull it out. Is this sword really as heavy as half of a great world? Letitia's beautiful eyes grew wider as she was surprised. Mother, Livingston said that the hilt of the sword could reduce the weight by half, but the sword itself is as heavy as an entire great world, Jeffrey said in a serious tone. Surely it can crush people to their deaths. However, no one worried about that at the moment. People were still mesmerized by Zen's ability to lift the sword, easily and swiftly. Zen wielded the great weighty sword and lifted it as if it were light. Would this mean he could easily lift a great world, too? Gripping the sword, Zen suddenly took a step forward and thrust the sword out into the air. This sword did not have any additional effect, but the star essence iron itself had an extreme weight, enough to slightly distort the surrounding space. Puff, puff, Puff. The sword moved gracefully in the air with Zen's swift movements. Although he wielded the sword without difficulty, the onlookers' eyes were filled with fear. What Zen held in his hand was the weight of a great world. Zen possessed strength no one could wrap their heads around. Chapter 1599. Test Zen's strength. After Zen practiced this set of swordsmanship, he sheathed the great weighty sword in his hand. Although Livingston's mind was indeed a bit muddled, one couldn't challenge his talent in the field of weapon refining. When the Infinity Stone was not enough to make a sword hilt, it was he who came up with an ingenious way for storing Zen's sword. Zen didn't want to take Livingston's advice to smash the sword on his opponent, but he liked the great weighty sword very much. This sword didn't seem to be flexible at all, but it was very compatible with Zen's swordsmanship. In any case, the emotion-closing godly way stressed on killing with a single blow, it did not call for any sophisticated swordsmanship. So it was not a flexible sword technique to begin with. Thanks to the great weighty sword, he could multiply the power of his strike. This great weighty sword is not bad. It's great for me to use. Zen smiled faintly. The scene that Zen swiped the heavy sword with ease left Livingston dumbstruck. Now that he heard Zen's praise, he was very excited. I haven't had a rest in years. I have been making some other treasures too. Livingston was like a child who wanted to show off all the nice things he had to his parent. He took out all the things he had meticulously crafted over the years in one go. If he said he didn't have a moment to rest, then it must be true. Although Livingston's body was ugly, it had one advantage. As long as there were enough life vitality crystals, it could operate non-stop. He did not need any time to rest. He was constantly researching and trying to understand the characteristics of the materials in the weapon refining workshop, and he kept inventing and innovating treasures based on these materials. If he didn't understand some material, he would go to the library to learn everything about it. The only problem was that Livingston was completely self-centered and a workaholic. In the past few years, he didn't even pay attention to the new group of people. He was totally immersed in his own world. This is the alms bowl of Akalanatha, a first-rank divine weapon. This is the will of harmony. Even though it is just an ornament, it can nourish a pill with its energy. This is the cloud flute. He showed off all his inventions with great pride and aplomb. Almost all of the magical trinkets refined by Livingston were defensive treasures. Zen's current body was tough enough, and he even had the redemption armor made by Holy Drew. Holy Drew had used the source of godly tile to make the redemption armor. The items made by Livingston, although impressive, were not of much use to Zen now. Zen couldn't deny their value even if he did not have a need for them. Livingston's skill combined with these rare materials from the divine land in the refining workshop, created treasures that could easily fuel a war in the universe. Take all of them, Livingston chuckled. He didn't need these treasures for himself. His interest lay in the refining process and not the end products. Moreover, the materials he used to make these treasures did not belong to him. His only request was for Zen not to kick him out of the refining workshop. Zen didn't hold back and grab the trinkets. So what if he didn't need these things? Letitia and the others might need them. Therefore, he gave all the treasures to Letitia so that she could gauge their characteristics and assign them to suitable people accordingly. After handing over these items, Livingston entered the material storehouse in the workshop and began to study a rare material that he had never seen before. He no longer paid attention to Zen. Zen stayed in the fairy palace for 2 days. Since Margaret was not in the fairy palace, the girls got along surprisingly well with each other. Letitia might be willful sometimes, but as the leader of Cloud Hall, she still had a gentle demeanor. Aura, on the other hand, was quite calm and composed at all times. She and Letitia had always been amicable and cordial with each other. As for Freya, her attitude was even more restrained. Strictly speaking, she was the strongest within the fairy palace, yet she behaved like a servant girl, taking care of all the miscellaneous trivial matters in the palace. Zen hadn't bothered to ask about the private matters of these people who were staying in the fairy palace for a few years, but Letitia casually mentioned them while they were chatting. The fairy palace had been slowly floating within the space created by the teleportation token in the last 2 days. On the 3rd day, the fairy palace was flying towards the core supreme world of the celestial position race at a high speed. In the end, it landed within the borders of the Breaking Cloud sacred place. The fairy palace rotated slowly and landed softly on the side of Breaking Cloud Mountain. The ones who had lived in the fairy palace for a few years wanted to see the outside world. Whether it was Imogen or Jeffrey, they all appeared to be impatient to get out and leave the confines of the fairy palace. However, when the fairy palace descended firmly on the ground, Zen prohibited them from leaving, choosing to only take Letitia and Frey out. There was a big difference in the vitality between heaven and earth in the lower world and the upper world. So the warriors who had just ascended to the upper world needed to stay in the ascending wells in order to adjust to the vitality between heaven and earth in the upper world. Letitia and Freya had stayed in the ascending wells before, while the others had never been in the upper world before. They would be unable to bear this new vitality between heaven and earth. However, it wouldn't be difficult for the celestial position warriors to solve this problem. As soon as Zen left the fairy palace, dozens of beams of light shot out from the top of the breaking cloud mountain. Naturally, these warriors were from the celestial position race. The man in the lead cupped his hands towards Zen and yelled, "Zen, Master Feng has been waiting for a long time." Most of the people who came to welcome Zen were world lords, and they were considered the elite warriors of the celestial position race. Although their cultivation was similar to Zen's, when they saw Zen, they were full of respect and admiration. Their respect was genuine and came from the bottom of their hearts, and not due to fear of Zen's strength. When Zen had left the evolutionary universe, his cultivation was at the Spirit Supreme realm and he had returned as a world lord. Their respect for Zen was also a result of his declaration of war. Zen's war declaration had struck a responsive chord in the hearts of many warriors. Many Supreme Lords also joined hands with Zen and used this opportunity to declare war on the sacred race. But, the truth was that the most excited people were the countless martial artists and not the Supreme Lords. These low-level martial artists were dissatisfied with the pacification tactics of the Supreme Lords. They had reached the point where they couldn't tolerate it any longer. They would rather die in battle than allow the sacred race to behave so arrogantly. Zen's return had completely changed this situation and given them a way to vent their frustrations. Zen was in the fairy palace for the past few days and was unaware of this grave situation in the outside world. All the warriors of various races in the universe were impassioned. The small races that had chosen to remain neutral and silent had also expressed their support for the human race. There was a light at the end of this horrific tunnel. They would fight against the invading sacred race together. As for Zen, he once again became an emotional anchor for all the warriors within the evolutionary universe. Therefore, it was hard to contain the excitement in their hearts when they saw Zen. People were overjoyed and filled with hope once again. "Please lead the way." Zen was rather calm. The celestial position warriors led the way, while Zen, Letitia and Freya followed behind. After crossing the breaking cloud mountain, Zen was brought into a hall at the back of the mountain. Master Feng and the Supreme Lords of the celestial position race were gathered in this hall. After Zen entered the hall, he saluted them. "Master Feng, you must have been waiting for a long time." Master Feng sized up Zen as a look of gratification appeared on his elderly face. "You're the first godly genius to return," he said with a smile. 3 years ago, what they let fly was a promise and a hope for future, and now was the time to make good on their hopes. This matter concerned the celestial position race, the evolutionary universe, and the fate of Holy Mike. "What about the others?" Zen asked. It was only then that he realized that except him, no one else had been able to make it. "I have already calculated where they are. They are all safe," replied Master Feng. Every single godly genius was an immeasurably valuable asset to the evolutionary universe, and the celestial position race placed all of its hopes on the godly geniuses. Naturally, they wouldn't allow any godly genius to be killed. The moment Master Feng learned that the godly geniuses had returned, he began to calculate where and when the godly geniuses would descend into the universe. Rocher had fallen into the territory of the ogres, and Kurt was the luckiest one, directly returning to the blessed Buddha land. On the other hand, Lawson, Lone, Xenia, and Carl had fallen into the supreme worlds of small races. Their situation was relatively safe, and Master Feng only needed to send some people to bring them back. The only trouble was with Lucille and Nathan. The two of them had fallen into the fiery rock world occupied by the sacred race. Master Feng explained the situation of the other godly geniuses to Zen, and then he smiled. "Zen, you've been training in the divine refinement forbidden land for 3 years, and you're already a world lord now. I wonder how strong you are." As he was speaking, he suddenly extended a finger and pointed it at Zen without elaborating any further. Chapter 1600. Resist with ease. When he saw Master Feng's finger, Zen realized that it was a test. So he turned over his palm and blocked lightly, instantly pushing out a vigorous force. With a faint smile, Master Feng changed his hand's move. He put his index finger and thumb together and with a flick, an intangible force shot out towards Zen's palm. But Zen didn't evade at all and continued blocking with his palm. But the power within his palm grew stronger and stronger to the point where he made no sign of retreat. The two sparred with each other with one hand each. In about 10 seconds, they had already exchanged at least 100 moves. When the several Supreme Lords of the Celestial Position race saw Zen's performance, they all smiled with satisfaction. It was nothing short of a miracle that a godly genius at the Spirit Supreme realm could advance to such a level after cultivating in the divine refinement Forbidden Land for only 3 years. Unfortunately, time is still too short. If we give them another 100 years, the sacred race would flee without a fight, Supreme Lord Mirage of the Celestial Position said with a sigh. It wasn't that Supreme Mirage was pessimistic. Although Zen's return brought vigor and confidence back into the hearts of all in the universe, to the real insiders the situation wasn't exactly for the good of all. The godly geniuses had returned, but they were only considered world lords. Perhaps the godly geniuses were far stronger than those of the same level, but at most, they could only contend against a grand world lord and weren't strong enough to face a supreme lord. The supreme lords and true gods of the two universes were those who truly decided the fight's victory or defeat. As the godly geniuses had just broken through and become world lords, it would still take them much effort to condense godly tiles and become true gods. In the end, the godly geniuses' return didn't change the situation. And Zen's war declaration was likely to enrage the sacred race. By the looks of things, an all-out war was nearing reality. By merely launching strikes with his hand, Master Feng had tested Zen's strength and skills. Since he only used about 10% of his strength against Zen, the latter's cultivation base was enough for him to successfully resist Master Feng's attacks. He could be considered truly excellent. But the several Supreme Lords present had no clue that Zen made use of a mere fraction of his strength. At this moment, he used only the power within his physical body to deal with Master Feng, and yet, he already had the upper hand. Bam! Zen threw a punch that landed on the edge of Master Feng's palm, forcing the latter to back a foot away. That's not bad. Though Master Feng wanted to test Zen's true strength, he wasn't one to admit defeat. When he didn't see any sign of exhaustion on Zen, he took a few steps back and said, "Be careful. I'll use 30% of my strength this time." Upon hearing Master Feng's words, the Supreme Lord's eyes flashed in shock. Although Master Feng wasn't very skilled at body refining, he was one of the strongest Supreme Lords in the universe, attributing to how his physical body's strength was outstandingly more powerful among the Supreme Lords. According to him, he previously hadn't been able to figure out Zen's true strength. And now he wanted to test Zen's strength against 30% of his own. Could he truly bear it? Worry filled the hearts of the Supreme Lords. Even though Zen's body was strong, he was still a junior in their eyes. In the end, he was just a world lord which in the entirety of the universe wasn't all that powerful. 30% of Master Feng's strength was released and his originally small, shriveled body suddenly swelled up. While his face remained old and withered, Master Feng's skinny frame grew muscular. To the warriors of Master Feng's level, changing their appearance was a mere matter of thought. But most martial artists felt it unnecessary. The strength has increased threefold. Zen's expression remained calm. He himself had tripled his strength and it was just barely enough to suppress Master Feng. But this time, Zen had extracted a portion of the power from the 8-path platforms. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. With their strength increased 3 times over, their attacks also grew twice as fast. Their right hands continued moving in the air as they sparred with each other. They changed and withdrew some moves, skillfully made use of the knack, employed their hidden strength, and dissipated power. The more they fought, the greater Master Feng's shock grew. Even though he had already used 30% of his strength, Zen resisted his strikes with ease. Supreme Lord Mirage was also stunned silent, only staring at Zen blankly. Seeing how easily he dealt with Master Feng, he guessed that Zen's actual strength could reach at least half of the former's. And the other Supreme Lords were just surprised. Master Feng's competitive spirit grew stronger and more riled up. He smiled boldly. "Not bad, Zen, have another try at it. This time, I'll use 50% of my strength. I'll also add some forceful strength to it. Be careful, now." If earlier was just a simple test, now that Master Feng had made his move, the sparring grew closer to a real battle. He had treated Zen as a real opponent. It sounded inconceivable. One of the top Supreme Lords in the evolutionary universe had taken a world lord as an opponent. Letitia and Freya stood behind Zen wearing varying expressions. "That old man, he seems really powerful," Letitia remarked under her breath. "He's a Supreme Lord. The warriors in the hall are all Supreme Lords of the Celestial Position race," Freya explained carefully. "It would seem that Zen is even stronger than I imagined." Because she stayed by Zen's side in the upper world, she generally knew much more than Letitia. Although she could see how the Supreme Lord was carefully examining Zen, the latter's expression remained calm and composed all the while. Could it be that Zen's power far surpassed that of all the other Supreme Lords present? Though the thought grew loud in her mind, she didn't dare say the words aloud. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Now that Master Feng made his move, streams of azure-gray forceful strength began flowing in all directions as his moves grew fiercer. The streams of forceful strength were like sword energy as they scurried around the entire hall. Some of them shot towards two women standing not far behind Zen, but with a wave of his hand, Supreme Lord Mirage obliterated the forceful strength. After Zen retreated a few steps, his eyes grew serious. At this moment, the 8-path platforms in his body began slowly vibrating. They began to emanate rays of 7-colored light, which just so happened to be the color of the strength source. Pa, pa, pa. Now, Zen's right hand was like a bolt of lightning as it suddenly grasped Master Feng's forceful strength. Every time he made a move, he could accurately chatter the forceful strength, producing a crackling sound, loud and clear. The sound was so loud that it echoed constantly throughout the breaking cloud mountain. Even Freya and Letitia couldn't bear the sound, and all they could do was to cover their ears with their hands. He broke the forceful strength with just a single hand. Not far away, Supreme Lord Sky was muttering to himself. This guy resists the force with ease. Supreme Lord Mirage's eyes were wide with disbelief. He couldn't find any words to aptly describe the scene. Now, Master Feng had used 50% of his strength, adding even forceful strength. If Zen could withstand it, he would exceed any Supreme Lord's expectations. He was, indeed, quite outstanding. But it was clear that Zen hadn't yet used his full strength. The fact had all the Supreme Lords and Master Feng embarrassed, to say the least. It was impossible for Master Feng to use his full strength against a junior, after all. If he did so, the sparring could no longer be considered a test, but instead, an all-out competition.